Japanimation Station.
Hello and welcome to Japanimation Station, an anime podcast brought to you by the folks at the Weekly Stuff Podcast. I am Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here once again to dive into the wild and wacky world of anime. Or are we? Because this week on the show, we ain't talking about anime, we're talking about the livest of actions. We are wrapping up our Lupin the Third season by talking about the true first Lupin the Third movie, Lupin the Third, The Strange Psychokinetic Strategy, but this is, of course, also our last episode of the season, so Jonathan has some special goodies he's prepared to help us see out this very momentous season of Japanimation Station.
Yes, just like we did in Season 2, where we finished that season with a couple of different topics and kind of a fun celebratory episode, this one we are indeed going to talk about Lupin in the world of live action with this obscure but very interesting 1974 movie. I'm going to give you all a little guide to all the great Lupin music you can find out there, because I've spent a lot of the time this season going over albums and learning things and taking notes, and I have an entire PowerPoint prepared that you guys are going to see, and I'm going to walk you all through. So that's going to be fun. We're going to give some wrap-up thoughts. We're going to play a little Lupin game, and at the end of today, we're going to give you a little preview of Season 4 of Japanimation Station. So stay tuned.
Yes, indeed. But before we get into any of that, we do have some not anime to talk about, and I'm very excited to talk about it because this movie is fucking crazy.
Crazy, I think, is the right word. What are we talking about today, Sean? We are talking about the 1974 Toho film, Lupin III, A Strange Psychokinetic Strategy. Now, Lupin III has been adapted into live action 3 times so far, as of this recording. First with this film in 1974, so this was after Part 1, but before any of the other anime. Then in 2014, there was a film simply titled Lupin III, directed by Ryuhei Kitamura and starring Shun Oguri as Lupin. And in a thing that makes me have to watch this movie, Tadanobu Asano as Zenigata, like a very big international star who's been in a lot of American movies as well. And then finally, there was a 9-episode TV drama in 2017 that I did not learn about until recently called Inspector Zenigata. It is indeed a show about Zenigata, but without Lupin, which kind of makes me wonder what the fuck it's about. That has Ryohei Suzuki as Zenigata, and it is narrated by Kenichi Kurita, the voice of Lupin. That show is very weird. It was co-produced by 3 companies, including Hulu, and it aired those 9 episodes in chunks across the different networks. Very weird, hard to track down. Those are the 3 live-action versions, but Strange Psychokinetic Strategy was the first, and it is the one we are talking about today. It came 2 years after the end of the first anime, and 4 years before the premiere of Part 2, and the expansion of Lupin's popularity over the course of the 70s, which led to the creation of Part 2, is attributed both to successful reruns of that first anime, but also to this film, which was a relative success, fairly well received. I could not find hard box office numbers, but it definitely has like enough of a following that it was in the first big Laserdisc box that they did of all the Lupin movies. It had everything up through Fuma Conspiracy, and then this was a bonus Laserdisc with this movie. The soundtrack for this was included in a box in the 90s of Yuji Ohno's music, and the soundtrack actually is a notable part of this film. We'll talk about that in a minute. But so it was fairly well received. This was a Toho film. All the principal creators were Toho people. Director Takashi Tsuboshima came up through the apprentice system and eventually specialized in absurdist comedies like this film, which were fairly popular in the period. It's very hard for me to find information on the writer of this movie, Hiroshi Nagano, because there's a younger Hiroshi Nagano who is a singer and actor who played Ultraman Taiga and eats up all of the search results. And I don't believe he is the person who wrote this movie because he was born in 1972. So he would have been 2 years old.
It's these, just very talented, a wunderkind of the highest order. He wrote this movie as an infant, and then he grew up to be an Ultraman. I think that's a wonderful life.
There is one fairly significant name here that I recognized. The music is by Masaru Sato, who studied under the great Japanese composer Fumio Hayasaka, you might know as the composer of Seven Samurai. He joined Toho in 1955 and scored the second Godzilla film, Godzilla Raids Again, and after Hayasaka's death, took over for Akira Kurosawa's movies. He did all of Kurosawa's films from I Live in Fear to Redbeard in 1965. And then he did do a couple other Godzilla films, I think in the, I'm forgetting his name. Who's the other? Jun Fukuda?
Jun Fukuda, yeah.
Yeah, he did a couple of those, like Ebira, Horror of the Deep. So that is like a name you would recognize if you've seen Toho movies.
Yes.
Yeah. And then in terms of the actors, two to talk about here. The guy who played Lupin, I was interested to learn, is an actor named Yuki Meguro, who was fairly popular at the time. He later went to America and played a supporting role in the 1980 miniseries Shogun, adapted from the novel, and got an Emmy nomination for that. And then here's a fun one. Kunie Tanaka, who plays Jigen, was a very prolific character actor from the era. He did a lot of Yakuza parts, including he had a recurring role in the Kinji Fukasaku movies Battles Without Honor or Humanity. And if you are a One Piece fan, Admiral Kizaru, the guy with all of the light powers, his design is explicitly modeled on Kunie Tanaka. If you've seen One Piece, all of the admirals are based on famous Japanese actors, and Jigen in this movie is the inspiration for Admiral Kizaru, which I think is very funny. Not a lot of other information I could find. This is a movie that is difficult to research because it is especially obscure in the English fandom.
Yes.
I think it's probably fairly obscure even over in Japan. I don't believe it's had a Blu-ray re-release at any point. I could double check that. We were watching a rip of Discotek did in their early days do a DVD release of this with subtitles and everything. It's extremely out of print, but people have ripped it and you can go find it online, and that's what we were watching. So yeah, Sean, I just gave them some of the history, but what was it like watching Lupin the Third in live action? What did you make of Strange Psychokinetic Strategy?
I fucking really enjoyed this movie. It is absolutely bonkers. It's that kind of sort of absurd slapstick comedy that as they kind of don't even make comedy movies at all anymore, but particularly this is just such an old school style of comedy film. But if you like the old Pink Panther movies and stuff like that, this is just that same kind of just ridiculous nonsense happening all the time. But I just really enjoyed it. It has almost no real meaningful plot to speak of, but that's fine because it's not a plot-focused movie. I also love the absurdity of the title of this movie and people just randomly talking about their psychokinesis, their nengiki, but I don't know what that means. I don't know the context for that. I don't know if they're supposed to literally have magic powers because it doesn't ever really come up. And it's just a thing. It's just a very, very wacky, silly movie, but I think it does have a lot of very fun, pretty clever moments in it, particularly with the filmmaking. They borrow anime style in some ways that I find very interesting, some anime film language that they just sort of take. It clearly, Lupin the Third Part 1 had already reached a significant level of popularity by this point because they make multiple very specific references and callbacks to things that Lupin the Third Part 1 did. And then also, it's just got some wacky shit. I remember when I downloaded the file that you shared with me originally so we could watch the movie, I clicked around in the movie just to make sure the file had worked and everything and all the subtitles synced up, and I clicked to just a random point around the middle of the film, and I clicked into the scene where they're in the train yard and there's an assassin that goes to fight Lupin, and then Lupin just teleports behind him, and then he breaks the fourth wall, talks to the camera. What? You didn't know what just happened there? And then it does a whole weird speed ramp thing where it shows him walk around and karate chop the guy in the back, and the guy starts falling in slow motion while Lupin runs in fast speed around. And it's like, that's actually a pretty clever like piece of filmmaking and like kind of trickery with how they film it and stuff like that. And it's a very silly gag, and they love their really ridiculous Benny Hill style fast walking, but it works really well. So I think it is a movie that's very silly, but it feels like the people making it had an absolute blast making this stupid movie, but also very clever in how they put it together and how they did all the visual gags.
Yeah, I think that's all true. It does not necessarily like work for me as a finished movie product. It's extremely loose. It's very vignette driven. I think even at 85 minutes, it feels a little overlong to me, just in terms of how many times sort of you're moving through different sort of plots and ideas. What is interesting to me is how like it's actually taking a lot from the manga in a way that even some of the more like quote-unquote faithful Lupin adaptations don't quite do. Because a lot of what you were referencing, Sean, of part one things that it was referencing, I'm not sure if it's part one or the manga, because I did check for all of those, and a lot of the big moments that it pays homage to part one are things that are also in the manga, are plots from that. And I think the general kind of like very quick nature of like every scene is sort of a loose plot that goes by pretty quickly, and then we move on to another silly thing. That is very much, I think, the Monkey Punch sort of touch, is that the plots are not usually that developed, but they're sort of like vessels for a lot of mayhem. A lot of like the anime things it's doing, some of them are like clearly anime ideas it's pulling from. Some of them I think are like manga logic ideas as well, you know, and just general sort of cartoon Looney Tunes logic, the kinds of stuff that, you know, Monkey Punch was pulling from anyway. And so all of that is in the movie. I think it's like a very interesting, at the very least, I find it like a very admirable attempt to say, we're doing a live action version of a cartoon, instead of doing what I think is the usual impulse of that, of kind of like toning down the world to fit into live action. They're like, let's go the other way and see how much cartoon logic we can bring into live action in such a way that it becomes like genuinely surrealistic at times. My favorite stretch of the movie is, it's from that same part you're talking about, which is in the middle. A bunch of assassins are going after Lupin, and it's about how he takes them all out, including one that just becomes a giant musical number with a bunch of nuns on the highway. There's a lot of good stuff like that, and it is definitely a very creative movie. It's interesting how much fealty it does have to kind of cartoon logic when like the actual Lupin characters are not super recognizable. Like, I think the guy who plays Jigen Kunie Tanaka looks the part. He looks fucking great. The character is nothing like Jigen in the show or the manga. Lupin himself is pretty different. I think Fujiko is the one that works best for me. There is no Goemon. Goemon was not brought into this one, which is too bad, because Toho had a lot of people who could have done a Goemon standing by on the lot, I would imagine. But yeah, it's a really interesting movie.
Yeah, the lack of Goemon is one of those things that like constantly reminded me that this is post part one. Because by the time you get to part two, you can't fathom them doing a Lupin thing that doesn't have Goemon in it at least a little bit, because at that point he became an essential member of the crew. But if one of your major reference points for Lupin is part one, like, he's a supporting character. He's not really a main character across that whole series. So it's one of those things where while watching it, I had to constantly remind myself, Lupin the Third Part 2 hasn't fucking happened yet, and there is something about that is crazy, because it is just like, it's getting access to this Lupin before it was really Lupin yet, right? Obviously, once Part 2 becomes an entire national sensation and defines in the public consciousness of Japan what Lupin the Third is, you can deviate from that and find nuances with it, which they do in like Part 3 and some of the other stuff, but you can't fight fully against it. And here, this is a movie that doesn't know any of that shit's going to happen. So it just does shit that you can't really imagine a Lupin thing 5-6 years after this ever really doing.
Right. Like, you know, for instance, I do think their interpretation of Lupin has some things I like, and I think their general view of him as someone who literally does not care about material circumstances whatsoever. He is just out for fun. I think that is very true to Lupin, particularly like early Part 1 Lupin and a lot of the early Monkey Punch stuff that they are pulling from. Because when I say the manga, by the way, the second half of the manga hasn't been written yet. That's the other thing, is that there was one manga series that went from like 66 to 69, and then it came back right before Part 2 started, and he did a second run that is just as long. It has, I think, maybe even more chapters. And so a lot of like what we think of as the manga just isn't out there yet, which is hilarious. So this is like a very early version of Lupin. And it's super interesting. It's a very different experience than your sort of modern, we talked about like the Full Metal Alchemist live action movies. This is not one of your like cosplay dramas. I don't know what else to call those kinds of like modern live action movies that are sort of super aware of like the stylistic surface of anime, but I don't know if they really do anything interesting to like pull anime tropes into live action, whereas this is not aware of the stylistic surface of anime, because anime kind of barely exists at this point, right? As an idea.
This is like pre-otaku culture as a thing, effectively. So it's like you don't have that factor into it either, which is one of like the main things that makes the modern version of anime or manga adaptations what they are, is that they know that they either know or they are part of the creators, like that larger otaku culture that like focuses around this kind of material. And I say that like Lupin itself is a little bit outside that sphere anyways because of the nature of the kind of show it is. But it is, like it's just from a totally different era of manga and anime. And so it is just like peeking into a very different time for the history of this kind of stuff, where manga and anime was not what it is, and that industry was not fully defined, and that culture was not fully defined yet.
Yeah, bare minimum, I think this movie is like a essential piece of history for all of that. It's such a cool peek into a different Japan, like a different culture. I mean, just down to the fact that this is a time, as you said, before Lupin the Third is Lupin the fucking Third, with like, 60 movies, 5, 6 TV shows, and all of that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. So where do you want to go with this? He's got a white jacket. Should we just say that right off the bat?
Yeah. It's a good, I think all the outfits in this movie look really good. I think I agree that for me, Jigen is the character that does not particularly work in terms of adaptation. He feels like a character that exists for like the broad plot to be able to function, not because they wanted Jigen in the movie, but I still think his outfit looks dope.
Yes.
I think, Fujiko has a bunch of outfits in the movie and they all look good. Like, there's just a good sense of very 70s style to this, that for me, my big reference point for that stuff is like the 70s Godzilla movies, because that's like the most 70s era Japanese film I've seen. And it did constantly make me think about like, this is not that far off from some of the shit the Godzilla movies around this time was doing in terms of like Godzilla versus Megalon with Jet Jaguar and shit like that. Like, this kind of very zany, kind of like funky jazz aesthetic and stuff like that. Like, the music is done by a guy who did Godzilla music at the time as well. And the use of color, all of that, the costuming, all of that feels like it is just coming from that same cultural place as those Godzilla movies from this period. And so that is something I very much enjoyed, just the look and style of it.
I've seen some of those Godzilla movies too, and there was something about like, man, Toho must have had a set of like back alleys and warehouse districts and highways they liked to shoot at, because it just feels like a lot of those places are very similar to places where the characters will run around in a Godzilla movie, or they might try to match footage for the miniatures or something. There's definitely a general sense of that. But I mean, it's also inventive with space and everything. This is a widescreen, big anamorphic widescreen movie, because every Japanese movie of the era was. And like those Godzilla movies, even when they're cheap, I think they have fun making use of that space. There's one composition in this movie I actually really love, where you have Lupin and Jigen in his weird hideout amidst all the big concrete cylinders. It's some kind of industrial district. I don't even know what you call those things, but there's some big construction cylinders. And you have Lupin in one and Jigen in the other, and they've kind of got their backs to each other, and there's a bunch in the background, and all of these like cops are coming in through the other cylinders, and it's this very long take with like multiple planes of action that they're doing that like I don't think it was probably that expensive to set up, but it's like conceptually complicated in a way that also makes use of the space of the frame. And it reminds you that like, oh right, because every studio in Japan basically mandated the use of anamorphic widescreen in this period, Japanese filmmakers of the time are the best to ever use that aspect ratio because they just trained on it to a degree that nobody else in film history ever has. And so even in silly comedies like this, where you wouldn't even think that would be much of a consideration, it's a huge consideration, and like the use of space for gags and everything like that is really quite developed.
Yeah, I mean, I do think like the visual language of this movie is like shockingly really sharp. Like its biggest weaknesses are all of its kind of narrative sensibilities, which it like is that thing of it has like no meaningful plot. Like I don't know how we're going to talk about the movie in terms of like breaking it down. Like what's the plot? Lupin gets into hijinks and shit like that. But it is so a vehicle for all these gags, and so many of the gags are motivated visually. And it's like very smart. So that scene you're talking about, like one of the things it's also doing is, and this is one of the places where it's using some like manga-like language, it is thinking about the way that those different spheres or like circles that the frame is being cut up into because it's looking through these multiple big cylinders. The spacing of that in the image creates the logic of the scene where like Lupin is able to sort of like evade their like vision because he's in this circle, even though in the actual logic of the space and the geography of that real location, he would be just standing out in the open in this big field, the same big field that those guys are. But because we're looking through two big circles and he's in the left circle and the cops are coming up through the right circle, like they can't see him. And he just walks through the mid space and cuts between the two circles and walks away. And there's a lot of stuff like that where they're thinking about the way that the visuals divide up the frame and create this sort of logic that works only for the viewer, right? And I think it's the thing I love about the title and the sort of energy of the movie is this whole weird thing of the psychokinesis, the nenriki, which is his psycho powers, which the movie never explains, and I'm glad it didn't. I was really worried it was going to at some point have like some exposition where he said, oh, I have mutant abilities, or I trained under this monk or whatever, and that's why I have these powers. But no, like what the powers are is it's like cartoon logic. He has the power of being able to exploit the like the meta nature of himself as a fictional character. So it's like he's able to exploit the logic of film editing. He's able to exploit the logic of like visual framing and spacing in the image in a way that for the other people and the other characters that exist in the movie, they in general can't do that, and they exist on like this logic that they can't interface with, and he's able to break it. And that's why he's able to teleport behind the guy and karate chop him, and why Lupin is able to move in a speed ramped Benny Hill speed, but the other guy has to be in slow motion, right? The movie is full of that kind of shit all throughout. And that's, I think, like, really clever. That's kind of stuff where there are definitely other movies that have done stuff like that, but it's something where you have to really think a lot about how you're constructing your shots, how you're, like, sequencing these kinds of things and how you're building those gags, because they work, I think, very intuitively to the audience because you're trained to understand filmic language. But if you try to break down actually what they're doing and how they had to conceptualize those jokes, there's a lot of work and thought that has to go into coming up with all those gags.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there is a scene in that same scene with all the big concrete cylinders, the kind of construction area, where once the cops get in, there's a giant chase amidst the hideout that is all done at super sped up speed, like hyper speed ramping.
Yeah.
And I actually was kind of bowled over by, it's fairly impressive if you think about just how long it must have taken to shoot. Like that looks like it took a whole fucking night to get through, not even the choreography of it, but just they have to do it all so that it can be sped up. And if you slowed that scene down to normal motion, it must be like an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours of just tons of all these people running all over the place. You know, I don't know if it's like actual speed ramping or if it's some kind of like time-lapse photography, because you can only get 10 minutes of film in a cartridge for this kind of thing. It's crazy, like all of that stuff. There's some really elaborate like setups and sort of choreography of comic plays that is genuinely impressive on the level of filmmaking. I mean, the thing I would compare this to, for people who haven't seen it, is a movie that is 20 years later, but is known for some of the same things, is like Jim Carrey, The Mask, of like trying to do sort of cartoon logic in real life. And that movie is like much more, like overwhelmingly more obvious with it, in that it like restricts restricts the cartoon logic to when he puts the mask on, and then it's using a bunch of special effects. The special effects in this movie mostly come down to things like speed ramping, some optical effects. Sometimes you'll have, the frame split in half where one is slow motion and one is fast motion, and that's basically just, layering two frames over each other. But very simple, like in-camera effects like that. But it's using that same cartoon logic. Down to, there's a scene where Lupin is looking out of a freaking telescope at Fujiko, and when he sees her on the car looking sexy, the telescope extends. Like he's in a Tex Avery cartoon. Like there's a bunch of Tex Avery cartoon logic there, like the wolf who like looks and then the heart beats out of the chest. They basically do their best to recreate some of those ideas, but in this very like lo-fi, tactile, it's all part of the world, it's not generally special effects.
Yeah, and so there's a very, like, practical, tangible nature to how they do all these sequences because, yeah, like, obviously, none of this is digital. None of it could be digital. And none of it is even, like, we're, like, painting in or, like, coloring in effects into the frames or shit like that, like you would do for a Godzilla movie with this fire or anything. Like, it's all very much, like, these are all actual people who had to do these things. The most you get is you have what is probably my other favorite joke in the movie, which is the sex scene where he has sex with this woman, but he turns into a male symbol because, as the text on the screen tells you, it's like this can't be shown. And then the lady turns into a female symbol, and you just get an animated version of two symbols having sex under a bed, while the thing is telling you must be censored because you cannot watch this.
That's from the manga. That's a cool touch that is
really?
In Monkey Punch does that a couple of times, and his line is always the male has been removed from this figure, so basically you're just looking at the woman, but he does some of that. It's not adapted into any of the anime we've seen. The show The Woman Called Fujiko Mine does do a scene with that same technique, although not for the same kind of comic effect. This movie really pumps it up for the comedy, and it was fun for me to see that because I'm like, oh right, that's a thing that is in the manga that I don't think they could have gotten on TV. Because it's still pretty racy. I mean, they full on have like humping and, like gesticulating and all of that, but just with these weird like comic figures of the male and female symbol and all of that. And Zenigata is watching it and being horrified. It's very good.
Yeah, but it's like even with that, where obviously they are like drawing onto the frames those symbols as they are quote unquote having sex. Like there's still the actual because you're looking at an actual room with an actual bed with an actual blanket that is being like lifted and lowered. I would love to see I assume it was probably on some strings or something like that to get that to happen. But like all of that is so tangible and practical. You can just feel the filmmakers being very creative and coming up with like very simple things to do, but that sell this idea of this ridiculous gag, which is that Lupin and this woman are actually having sex in this bed. You just can't see them do it, but you need to see everything else in the room, and the bed is shaking up and down and all that kind of shit to kind of sell the joke. And I love that about this movie. I just love the very physical, practical nature of it, which obviously like movies at this time did this kind of stuff constantly. But if you've been watching a lot of more modern movies recently, you very much miss this sensibility of filmmaking, and this movie is a really good example of it.
I mean, there's an energy to it that feels not in terms of like skillfulness, but in terms of like the energy, like a student film or someone getting their first camera and like really being excited at all of the possibilities. Like when you and I made like movies in high school together, we did stupid effects like this, where like when you realize you can have someone disappear from the frame by just having them stand there and then move out of the frame and then cut it, that's like a magical moment because you're like, I can build gags around that. And this movie is that done with like a bunch of professionals who know what they're doing. And I think, but very energized by the just very simple possibilities by what you can do with splicing frames together and speeding up the footage and very little things like that just take, I think, some creativity and, commitment. And that is definitely something that is very endearing about the movie.
Yes, and it's just a constant presence. Like going back to the one that you were saying, the Tex Avery scene of the telescope extending out like it's a boner, basically, which is the joke in case people didn't get it. And then it cuts to Jigen, who is looking at Lupin, and then he's like, what the hell? And then it cuts back to the toilet that Lupin was sitting on, because it's the greatest set in the history of sets, because it's a giant empty room with like some weird statue shit in the background, and then there's just like a platform, and on the platform is a toilet right next to these windows, and that's what he's sitting on. And every time they go back to that set, I have no idea why that's where the toilet is, but I fucking love it. It's just this weird toilet throne. But that's where he was, and when it cuts back to the toilet throne, Lupin is gone, and it's just his pants sitting there, but they're like, but looking like, you know, like a cartoon thing, where it's like they're still filled out like the legs were there, which I assume they probably just like starched it or something, or they made a thing that looks like pants that's like paper mache or something. But it's so good. It's such a dumb fucking cartoon joke, but this idea that he ran out of the room so fast that his pants were left behind, and so he doesn't have pants on for the entire scene. He's in the car with Fujiko. It's the movie is that shit constantly, and I fucking love it. It's dumb, but I fucking love it.
Oh, the running gag, because Lupin loses his pants over and over again in the movie. It's a running gag. Like, that's not the only scene where he's in his underwear. At the end of the movie, he loses them again, and Fujiko just looks at him and says, "You sure take your pants off a lot." And I died laughing at that, because it's a very good joke at, like, the very end of the movie. And that's when they're, like, hanging from the helicopter, and she's, like, trying to hold on to him and not die in a very kind of, like, Fujiko manner, like everyone's in over their head.
Yeah.
That moment is very good. Yeah. I think something to say as we get into talking about this movie is that, like, as an adaptation of Lupin the Third, the, like, overall property we've talked about, this is not super recognizable. It has a lot of, like, obvious, you know, differences. The plot does not really hold together. Jigen is not really quite there. I think Zenigata is a very kind of shallow, not super interesting version of Zenigata. I enjoy this movie more on its own merits than I think as a sort of Lupin exercise, which is fine. I want to be clear. And again, in 1974, what a Lupin thing was much more in flux, so a lot of that is obviously perfectly acceptable. This would be a weirder movie today for a whole lot of reasons.
Yeah,
obviously.
I think you couldn't imagine someone approaching the franchise like this today, which is why I like it. I like that it's just like, I don't know, you know, we'll take what we can and what we like from the source material, but, you know, they're not going to try to make the dude's hair look exactly like Lupin's hair, and all, which is a good
call. Yeah. Yes. You know, but like, it's interesting. It does pull for sort of the closest you can come to saying this movie has a central plot is there is this sort of backstory about Arsène Lupin the First and Second having built the Lupin Empire crime family, which is an idea, as I understand it, in some of the early Monkey Punch material, is this, because Monkey Punch actually goes into stories with Lupin the First and Second in a lot of different ways. And one of those is the idea that Lupin inherited this sort of empire of the big crime family. I don't think it's ever displayed kind of quite the same way as it is in this movie, where there's a very like clear kind of continuity to it, and Jigen was part of it, and all of that stuff is new. But they are sort of pulling that. I do think that plot element leads to the weird thing of Jigen is sort of a kind of like simpering, kind of almost like sycophant to Lupin in this one, which is a weird characterization of Jigen. Because I really like his first scene where he does this cartoon shootout where he gets 3 assassins at one, and I'm like, that's a pretty good Jigen. But after that point, he's a pretty different character. But I kind of like the way they do the Lupin Empire stuff, where they set it up as this big backstory and expectation to explain like who this crazy thief character is. And then as soon as Lupin hears about it from Jigen, he's like, I don't give a shit. I'm not restoring the Lupin Empire. I'm not doing any of that. At one point, Jigen has 30 billion yen in a Swiss bank, and he has a special like note proving it. And Lupin throws it out with all the other furniture, and a homeless dude like wipes his ass with it. And Lupin's like, I don't need 30 billion yen in a Swiss bank. I'm good. And I kind of like that aspect of the movie, how it kind of inherits that idea out of the Lupin Empire weirdness.
Yeah, I like that as well. I like their characterization of Lupin, even if it's obviously a little bit different than kind of what we come to expect. But it does have that energy to the core of it, of that laissez-faire, like, fucking whatever, man. I'm just going to do what I want. Like, I don't need that stuff, because he's not into it to, right? This is the core difference between Lupin and Fujiko, and this is like a pretty constant thing in the franchise, is that Fujiko wants the things because she wants the things. Lupin wants the things because he wants to have the adventure of it. He doesn't care about actually having the diamond or whatever. He wants to go through the process of doing the diamond heist. Fujiko just wants to have the fucking diamond. She's going to do whatever she can to get it because she just wants to have it. I don't think she wants to spend it on anything. She just wants to own it. And that core element is here in this movie, and I appreciated that. I think the thing that's weird is that they spend that kind of first section doing what you're saying here, where they introduce some of the characters, they introduce this whole Lupin Empire idea, and part of that is there's the macaroni family. It's not literally macaroni, but it's basically macaroni, which is an Italian mob family that is the one that destroyed the Lupin Empire. They introduce all that stuff. And then the whole middle section of the movie is just Lupin Fujiko adventures, which is fun. And then at the third section of the movie, it brings the macaroni people in, and they're like, we need to kill Lupin. And then later, out of nowhere, there's a statue that's a Jomon era Japanese stone statue, which if people don't know what that is, if you Google it, you'll have seen these before. It's got the eyes. And it's but this one, it's got magic jewel eyes with psychokinetic power. And that's what the final heist is about. And it's and it introduces that concept. And I paused the movie and there was 18 minutes left or something. It's okay, this is a pretty late point in the movie for the Strange Psychokinetic Strategy, which is name dropped by a character in that scene, for that to be introduced. And there's less than 20 minutes left of the film. But that's the nature of what this movie is. It's just kind of three different overall plots that have a dozen mini plots within there. Obviously Zenigata's doing his whole shit across the whole movie, across that stuff. But it definitely is, if you want to have a good crime thriller thing, which is a thing that lots of Lupin stories do, including in part one, that is not what this movie is doing. The actual plot in the story, in the crime drama, and that side of it, the movie is not invested in literally at all. It's like Lupin in that way. It does not give a fuck about telling that side of things, which is a shame, because I do think, this movie could be kind of a hidden gem classic if it could balance both the crazy hijinks and build a pretty decent plot. And that would be a much sort of stronger, clear representation of, I think, the strengths of the Lupin franchise in live action, because that's what the Lupin franchise does in animation. Instead, it feels the kind of discard that one part of it, the plot side of it, to focus entirely just on the wacky hijinks.
Yeah, it has the energy, I think, almost of not Monty Python's Life of Brian, which is a coherent story, but almost Monty Python and the Holy Grail, or The Meaning of Life, one of the ones that is more sketch-based and kind of vignette-driven, and that is basically what this is a series of vignettes. It almost feels like it could be several episodes of a TV show kind of slapped together, something like that, more than it is a coherent movie, which is I kind of vacillate between whether that's a strength or a weakness. I think overall it does have the weakness of it just doesn't hold together as a movie, but there is something fun about just the kind of laissez-faire attitude of it, as you say. And I do think it actually makes me appreciate The Mystery of Mamo all the more for how fully it nails both halves of the franchise in that sense, and balances all the characters amidst that, which is why that is probably the most purely representative piece of Lupin media. But yeah, absolutely, that is sort of what this movie is doing. I do think, as you say, I think the Lupin Fujiko dynamic is that's the thing they nail. I think Fujiko here is I could not find any information on that actress, but that is the characterization that most evokes the character to me. I think they got Fujiko pretty much dead on. No one else quite evokes. I like this Lupin is kind of funny. He does not quite evoke the Lupin of the show. And then Jigen and Zenigata, Jigen just feels different, and Zenigata feels a pretty kind of thin understanding. It's a lot of when it's not Goro Naya doing it, I tend to think Zenigata can just be a guy who yells a lot. And I think that's not what makes Goro Naya funny, and I think it's something that is missed here. But also, Zenigata had not come fully into his own by the end of part one. That's a part two thing. So I kind of understand why they don't have a sort of bigger version of him here, Yeah,
Zenigata is a very kind of rote character. He feels less like Zenigata and more like the various cliches that Zenigata himself is based on, right?
Yes.
He's just the sort of bumbling police detective who's obsessed with catching his target, which obviously is the thing that Zenigata's based in. But I think what makes Zenigata work, and especially Goronaya's performance, is that you feel like a much deeper well of humanity that's underneath all of that. And that's where you can imagine, like, the thing we've talked about before on this season of, like, imagining he has, like, a wife and daughter at home whom he never sees and all that stuff. And, like, the sad life of Zenigata is something that you can feel underneath the Goronaya performance. I think that's part of what makes that character very fun. Whereas here, it's much more standard. But that being said, like, I do enjoy that stuff. Like, this has a couple of Zenigata gags I fucking loved. I love the first big joke with Zenigata. It's somewhat understated by the standards of this movie, but I got a pretty big laugh out of me. Which is Zenigata gets assigned to the Lupin case, and the police commissioner tells him, like, I want you to go investigate this Lupin the Third guy. And he says, yes, I will arrest him. He says, no, I told you, I want you to investigate him. He says, I will arrest him no matter what. It's like, okay, fine, do whatever you want. And I thought that's a gag that I'm surprised that that I did not see in the anime, because that feels like an interaction he would have in part 2 with the police commissioner who's like, Lupin hasn't actually done anything. I just want you to investigate what's going on. And he's like, I will arrest him. Taihoda, and all that shit. Like, you can imagine Goronaya doing that scene and it being very good. There's a couple of other Zenigata gags I like. Like, there's a whole extended gag throughout the whole movie of him constantly getting injured and having more and more casts. And there's a lot of weird physical comedy with the cast.
All of that's good, yes.
His arm popping out of it and stuff, and him be like, oop, and then he putting it back in because it's supposed to be in the cast, and him hitting it on shit. There's just a lot of physical comedy around that character that I think that performer does a very good job pulling off all the physical gags he's asked to do.
Oh yeah, you can tell he's like a skilled actor in this kind of comedic vein, because like the scene you were talking about, the Taiho da, he's a very good at like the wordplay, throwing back and forth, and all of those scenes are very funny. Absolutely, yeah. It's not like, as you say, kind of a super specific take on Zenigata. And I said like part 1. Now I'm thinking about it. Part 1 has the freaking episode on the boat. It has episode 4 where they're in jail. Part 1 actually did a great job with Zenigata when I look back on it. But anyway,
yeah, it's more that like they had like Zenigata episodes, but he wasn't a constant presence in the same way they did Goemon, where here's like a couple of really good Goemon episodes, and then in episodes where he just shows up but it's not about him, it was kind of whatever.
And episodes in it, part 1 has just episodes where not everyone is in it, which is not true of other Lupin series. Yeah. In any case, yeah. That this side of the movie, I do particularly like the gag with all of his injuries, and that at the end when Lupin, the ending of this movie is absolutely brilliant, and one of my favorite gags, which is that Lupin and Jigen and Fujiko have stolen the like psychokinetic gems from the like ancient statue. I don't even quite know what to call it, but they have that whole thing ready, but they need to land the helicopter because Lupin and Fujiko are going to fall off. So Jigen brings it down and they're like, oh, thank God we lived. But then they realize they've brought it to where it was supposed to go anyway, which is this like laboratory that was going to investigate the diamonds. And everyone hails them as heroes. And Zenigata is assigned to deliver a letter of thank you to Lupin III for his heroism. And so the end is Zenigata trying to catch up to Lupin to do that. And they have a big silly chase with a lot of speed ramping in the image, and Zenigata winds up just ripping all of his casts off, which is absolutely something I can imagine animated Zenigata doing. That is one of the best like Zenigata moments, and I kind of wish there was an episode with that exact plot because it's hilarious.
Yes, yeah, that was another moment that I felt like, wow, like this movie has stumbled on like what feels like a classic Lupin idea, which is like that, because you can so imagine that being an end of an episode in Lupin the Third Part 2, and them getting chased around. And yes, there's a moment where Zenigata just takes off all the casts and just throws them and shatters them on the ground, and it's fucking great. Zenigata also has 2 bumbling sidekick detectives that I also love, that are just these 2, they're very kind of stock comedy movie characters that are just like these 2 just idiots that are also there, that are just there to do different gags. But I love those 2 guys. They do such a good job with all the humor. And there's one scene in particular where when Lupin escapes from the prison, and they have this little back and forth where Jigen disguised as a lawyer leaves, and they're like, oh, bye. And then that same character leaves again, and they're like, oh, bye. Says, wait, did a lawyer just leave? Yeah. And then did another lawyer just leave? Yeah. And is Lupin not in his cell anymore? I mean, it looks like it, and it just cuts. Like, there's a lot of good gags between those two morons.
They also get, I did not like write down what the names were, but you have Zenigata introduces himself like, I'm 7th generation Koichi Zenigata. And then they are also multi-generation. I did not recognize the detective names, but they were also multi-generational detectives.
Yes, yeah, it was like, yeah, and I am also Daisuke, blah, 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 from, and I'm this, like, the great, and he get cut off, and then the next guy comes in. Yeah, like, that is also another gag that you're surprised that you didn't see. Maybe that's, like, in the manga or something, because it feels so Lupin. You're surprised you didn't see it in the manga, where there's just, like, a bunch of other people who are also descended from other old police characters in Japanese fiction.
It's something I like about the, we talked about this in the Part 3 podcast, the Lupin the 8th pitch, where it's in the future.
Yes.
And now Fujiko and Jigen can also be Fujiko and Jigen, the, great-great-grandsons, because they are the only two in the original Lupin cast who are not the descendants of somebody. Because Goemon, Zenigata, and Lupin are all descendants, which is like a joke that Monkey Punch really loves, because he also did it with, like, Sherlock Holmes and stuff.
Yeah.
Who, by the way, there's a scene where Lupin is doing a foot race with Sherlock Holmes. He doesn't look, they just say it's Sherlock Holmes. There's no, like, visual gag there, but it is funny that I'm like, oh, that's a weird invocation of Sherlock Holmes, but sure, I enjoy it. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's like someone go add that to the Wikipedia page for Sherlock Holmes as if it's not on there. If there's another character that threatens his, like, the character most adapted in fiction Guinness World Record, it's like, here's one more. He shows up in this foot race by name with Lupin III in Lupin III Strange Psychokinetic Strategy, the 1974 live action film adaptation of Lupin III. That goes on there as well.
Assuming that, because this has to be the case, that whatever person is portraying Sherlock Holmes in that scene is not in the credits of this movie, do you think it would be possible to do the research involved to find out who that person is, to list him under the name of people who have played Sherlock Holmes?
Oh, God, you'd have to go to Japan and go find, hopefully a lot of the people involved in the production of this movie are still around. I mean, it's been a while.
The director and writer are both dead, and the composer, so...
Shit. Did they have, like, maybe they have kids and you can go ask them, and it's like, did they write it down somewhere? Who's the guy? Because you truly, I don't even think you see him in focus at any point. Like, he's on, like, the edge of the frame as Lupin is racing him. But yes, I was also flabbergasted by that weird Sherlock Holmes name drop.
We'll add it to Wikipedia as unknown Japanese man Sherlock Holmes in Lupin III Strange Psychokinetic Strategy. No, I love all that. One other Zenigata gag I do like is that they do the thing twice, and this is a super cartoon move where we introduce Zenigata where we're outside the building and he's like slamming his fist down, and the camera does this violent shake to suggest that like the building has like, because in a cartoon what you would do is you would make it look like the whole building like leaps up and is like animated by the force of him smashing his fist down. Here it is just they shake the camera, and the second time they do it later, like near the end of the movie, the camera shakes so hard I'm surprised it didn't break. Like the camera shakes so hard and then it stops and the shot continues and is in focus, and I was blown away by that. I'm like, how did it not fall off the fucking tripod, fall apart? Like, that must have been a sturdy ass fucking camera, because it looks like they were trying to destroy it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the specific thing that I saw that I was like, this is the most anime thing I have ever seen something in live action do. Because it is trying to, because that's like specifically an anime thing. Because it is so done in anime, it's so often done, because it's like, oh, we want to show that like everything in this room fell over or whatever and made a huge crash. Well, that's fucking expensive to animate. We can't have, like, these cupboards fall over or whatever. That's, like, a lot of drawings you have to do of, like, complex geometric shapes. So instead, let's cut to the outside. Let's shake the camera on a background that we've already made this background, because it's one of our location backgrounds. And we just shake the camera, which is very easy to do with animation, because you just start literally shaking a camera. And
well, you're shaking the image under the camera, probably. Yes. The camera is still, and you basically just take the cell and go shake,
wiggle it. And then you cut back into the interior, and you have like something that shows, oh, everything has fallen over and is broken. That's just something that anime will do something like that all the time, because it just makes it really easy to communicate the impact of this thing without having to spend any fucking money on it. And I don't think I've ever seen anything in live action do that specifically. Obviously, you'll do camera shakes in like Star Trek to make it imply that the ship got hit by a space torpedo or whatever. But that's like an actual practical reason to do it. There's truly no reason in when they do the camera shakes in here that they need to do a camera shake. There's so many other things they could do that live action movies would typically do to communicate the impact or whatever they need with those cuts. But they it feels like they deliberately are saying, let's make this feel like an anime thing and just shake the camera like a fucking maniac.
Yes, absolutely. What are some other moments we should talk about in this movie, Sean? In terms of like Lupin and cartoon logic stuff, this is another one that it's in part 1 and it is also in a manga chapter that part 1 adapted, so I'm not sure which one they're specifically pulling from, but we do get the jewel vacuum. We get Lupin breaking into a store and they use the vacuum, and there was something about seeing that particular Lupin gag done in live action that really tickled me, because you're like, you can do this. You can just like feed a fucking vacuum in here and do that. It almost looks like extra silly in live action because there's the image of Jigen like, first off, it's very weird. Jigen like shoots a hole in the wall and then punches the hole out and then is like feeding the vacuum up and it goes up through the toilet. But all of that is great. And then at the end, the cops are coming out and Zenigata and everyone fall through the toilet and the wall as the vacuum pulls out. All of that I thought was very good.
Yeah, and I love that they do the vacuum cleaner thing with the jewelry, because it's like in cartoon logic, that makes perfect sense that you just suck it all in because it's a giant vacuum cleaner. But when you see someone have to actually do it in real life, it works, but it seems so inconvenient because it's like, you have to position it so sort of specifically to get it to suck the thing up in, and it almost certainly would break so many of those jewelry pieces as they're getting rattled around and having to get sucked up into this thing. It's just looking at the actors trying to get the shit into the right position for the vacuum to get enough suction for it to actually suck it up. It just feels like, why not just have a bag? Because these are all they're necklaces and rings and small jewels. So just get a backpack, dude, and just throw them in the fucking backpack and run away. Because obviously in a cartoon, you could just suck up an entire shelf worth of those things because it's cartoon logic. Having to see them actually have to suck it up into the vacuum cleaner, it's so funny. But I loved it. I loved, the practical feeling of, this is technically something you could do. This would really work in real life. It's just probably actual real world physics probably makes it so inconvenient. If they're items small enough to be fit through a vacuum cleaner, probably they're small enough that you can just put them in a bag and run away. There's probably a reason why bank robbers didn't use giant, comically large vacuum cleaners, even though that technology has been around for a very long time.
Yeah, there's something about seeing it in live action that reminds you, oh, right, the vacuum is the least reliable household appliance right next to the printer. Those are the two things that I most hate in my I don't even have a printer anymore. But the vacuum is the other one that just you have to do weird fixes to, and it doesn't work half the time and all of that. And it's just I fucking hate this thing. I would never fucking rob a store with this. If I had to rob a store, it would be, but Lupin can do it, and it is funny to have that. Let's see, what are some other things they kind of pull from the manga and stuff like that? Well, there are a couple of surprisingly graphically violent moments. I don't know if you noticed those, when Lupin shoots the assassin through the eye, and we get the full-on shot. It was bloody eye, but they do it in this cool way where we come out of the barrel of the gun. We get a shot. They do this in the opening titles of the movie, too. It's very James Bond-esque, where the bullet, hits the screen and, shatters, and there's this little animation, but they do it into the dude's eye. And then in, the climactic chase in the movie, Lupin is on a bike, and he's got this big, golden swordfish thing, and he just full-on impales a dude. There's no blood, but he does just impale the dude through the belly and then run away. And that was oh my god, how'd they get that in there?
In a strange way, that might be the weirdest thing that happened in the movie, because there's so little context for it of what is this thing he has on his weird dirt bike, and who is this random bad guy just in a field, and Lupin just fucking impales him, kills him, and then rides away on the motorbike. That's really weird. That shot with the dude who gets shot in the eye, that has a really cool shot that enters that scene, because that's I think that's the sex scene one, I think, and that's it starts with the camera doing kind of a widest shot looking through the window of the building at Lupin, and then it zooms out, And then after it zooms out, the image of the reticle comes into like the reticle on the screen that is through the scope. It just turns into the scope vision, but there's no cut there, and it's like really smooth. I'm not even entirely sure exactly what they did, but like however they did it, if they put something in front of the camera lens or something to get that to happen, the way it looks is so like slick feeling as the camera zooms out and then turns into a like scope view, and then you get a reverse shot and you realize it's a sniper assassin. There's a lot of good stuff like that, and then then you have the bullet coming into the screen, and there's like a little clock in the bottom right corner to show you this is moving in, this is slow motion, this is like, bullet time before we knew what bullet time was, because the Matrix didn't happen. So we have to have a little clock to sell the effect.
Well, this is the best stretch of the movie by far. Part, it's like a 15-minute sequence where, plot-wise, it is the loosest. I honestly don't even know what Lupin and Jigen are trying to do at this point. All I know is that what's happening is the Macaroni Gang has sent all these assassins after Lupin. But this sequence of events with the assassins, there is that scene we're talking about, there's the sex scene, there's that whole moment you mentioned earlier, that is, I think, probably the best individual scene in the movie, which is Lupin, like, just suddenly defeats this assassin, and then he comes to the camera and is like, you didn't see that? Let me slow it down for you. And you have him moving in fast motion while the assassin is moving in slow motion, and it is the most Bugs Bunny thing I think has ever been captured in live action. And then the climax to all of that is when he's on the highway and there's the 6 nuns, and you assume it's going to be the classic gangster movie thing where they turn around and they have Tommy guns or something, but instead they turn around and they're actually dancers who do a big fucking musical number, and then there is a big fight because they are assassins. But at first they're just doing a musical number, and this must be some kind of group from the period, because they're credited in the opening credits as the Poppies, just in like Roman letters, playing the Dragon Sisters is the group. The Poppies playing the Dragon Sisters, and it's like a very energetic, fun musical number that transitions into a very well choreographed fight on this highway. It's super cool. Like, that 15-minute stretch is fantastic.
Yeah, that's easily the best part of the movie is all the assassin stuff. And yeah, I do love the wacky dance scene that then, like, the joke is then that, like, they come in and they surround Lupin while they're dancing, and then their dance slowly turns into like a karate moves and they start attacking him. And then, of course, the payoff to the scene is, classic cartoon hijinks where they're fighting and then Lupin's pants get pulled down and, we don't see anything, but they all clearly see his dick and they scream and run away. He's like, what's this going on? And he looks down, sees his pants are pulled down. He looks into camera and puts his hand over his head. Like, oh my. And then it cuts and it's like, this is great. This just made me realize I love cartoons. Watching this actual real people do cartoon jokes makes you realize how good cartoon jokes are.
Absolutely. That might be like the best thing about this movie, is it makes you appreciate actual cartoons so much. Not because this is bad, but because there is just so much it's bringing in that when you see it in live action, you appreciate it, I think, in a different way. And, I do think there's some scenes where, like, the cartoon logic just feels a little, like, stilted in live action and doesn't fully work, even when I think it's interesting. Like, there's a scene early on, I think, where they're trying to get into a, like, underground area, and Lupin is doing this, he's ready to do this big jump in and, like, break down the door, and then Fujiko just opens it. And I think it's, like, theoretically funny, I think it's well staged, but I think, like, because they do this thing basically where Lupin is frozen in midair, but it's one of those moments I found more sort of, like, intellectually interesting than funny, whereas there are other ones that I think are both, and they're like, oh, this is interesting filmmaking and it's very funny. And this is inevitable when you're adapting cartoons into live action the way they are. It's going to be a little hit and miss, and that's not really a criticism, just something to note. One thing I like is Lupin's fighting style in this movie. I can only describe, the words I came up with were comedy wuxia. The way they do it is it's a lot of, like, Lupin is very, it must have been influenced by, like, King Hu and, like, early wuxia stuff, not the later, like, wire fu, where it's very sort of flowing, the kind of stuff that, like, influenced Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, but more like if you've seen Dragon Inn or A Touch of Zen, sort of King Hu's big movies, Come Drink With Me, and he did a lot of this in the edit, where you would have an actor jump out of frame, and you would cut to them up in the air, then you would cut to them falling or something like that. And they do that with Lupin here, particularly in this scene where he fights Jigen and gets all of Jigen's guns. Well, he thinks all of them. There is a phenomenal gag where then Lupin is like, Jesus, how many guns do you have? And Jigen opens his jacket, and it's just a silly amount of guns on him. But basically, Lupin's whole, like, flying around, jumping fight style is very much like a comedy version of sort of the King Hu wuxia thing.
Yeah, or like the other place that comes from, and I think this is still like a wuxia influence, but it's very like Super Sentai Kamen Rider, which would have been out by this point.
Yeah.
You would have had Japanese Spider-Man, the emissary from hell himself, would have been doing some of this shit. And that's very much the, like, cut to some sort of, like, diagonal up shot and show a dude flipping, and use that a lot to imply that someone is doing a really cool jump, because, of course, it is, like, very expensive and requires a lot of technical expertise to actually do big wire stunts is very hard.
I mean, the Toei's...
do those flips.
The Toei Spider-Man movie, like the 25-minute short film, has a scene that I'm pretty sure is a direct quote of a scene in Dragon Inn, where Dragon Inn near the end, the big enemy, does this thing where he's leaping onto all of the trees, and it's just this series of wipe cuts, or like, it's these fast camera moves and then a cut of him on tree, on tree, on tree, and they do that in this Spider-Man thing where he's fighting these bad guys, and he's jumping from, like, branch to branch in this tree in like this park area, and I've shown both of those things to students, and they are both moments that make them laugh wildly. So I think it's a similar vein of influence, definitely. But you're right, all of the Super Sentai stuff is super strong here.
It's all that stuff is very fun. Going back to Jigen a little bit, like one thing I guess I like thought was weird about his character, because we've talked about that his characterization feels very strange, and feels like the most off of all of the Lupin characters that are in this. And one thing that like I was very shocked and upset by at first, and then it never fully worked for me what they were doing, but this isn't really what they're doing with the character. But the first scene you have with him, he's talking to this like priest at an orphanage, which is where Lupin grew up. That led to another very cartoon anime feeling moment of like a series of very good flashbacks of little kid Lupin.
We'll talk about that in a second. My favorite joke is here.
But while Jigen is talking to the priest, he is talking in Keigo, or honorific Japanese, and he refers to himself using the word watashi, and that is literally, as far as I can remember, I'd have to go and rewatch a lot of Lupin shit and like be listening for it, but I don't think we have ever heard Jigen use that. He always says ore, which is a much more rough masculine way of referring to yourself, because it's fucking Jigen, right? Jigen speaks in a very kind of loose, rough, extremely casual Japanese that you would expect for what he looks like, right? He talks the way that he sounds, he sounds the way that he looks. And that's the kind of the way he talks. And when you first meet Jigen, it's like I didn't realize it was Jigen. I mean, I thought it was like, well, it probably should be him because he's got a beard and he's got a hat. There's a lot of good hat jokes where Jigen can't see anything with his hat on, so he constantly is having to push the brim up, which I don't know if some of them I'm not even sure if they were intentional jokes or if it was just the actor literally couldn't see, so he constantly had to push up the hat. I think it's maybe a combination of the two. But like I thought it wasn't Jigen at first because he didn't sound like the character. But then what you realize is once you get deeper into the movie, he switches between those two modes. He sometimes, like when he thinks, oh, I don't need to be acting very proper, he slips into speaking the way that Jigen speaks. And he uses ore, and he has these very kind of loose masculine endings to his sentences, ending sentences with like, instead of janai desu ka, it's like janei ka. And it's a much looser way of speaking Japanese. And he flips between those two modes, and he notably does it when he's speaking to Lupin, or when he's trying to treat Lupin like you're like the heir to the Lupin empire, and you need to like rebuild it and all that stuff. And he calls him Bochan at first, which is like a like young master thing, like a thing you'd call the like heir to the Yakuza clan or something. And then he eventually like reduces that just to Bo, which means like boy. But he flips between those two modes when he like is treating him like the young master. He speaks in proper Japanese, and it is just like a bit more wimpy sounding, and then he'll slip into this looser Jigen talk. And I thought it was like interesting that they're going for this kind of split, but it never worked for me because I don't think you ever get enough of him in that looser mode to like get a sense of who this guy actually is. And I've just found that very frustrating. And they also give him the wrong gun. He has a revolver, but it's like a puny little snub-nosed revolver. It's not this huge fucking Smith & Wesson like 45 caliber revolver, whatever the fuck he has. That, this is like a very specific make and model that the manga and especially the anime, even at this time, was very particular about what his gun is. And he has the wrong gun, and I couldn't really forgive them for that.
Yeah. Maybe it's hard to get the right guns in Japan because they have actual gun control. So it's easier to draw them than to actually find them. Because all of the guns in this look pretty fakey, especially Lupin is using this weird gold pseudo Walther kind of thing.
Yeah, it's not a Walther P38 either.
No.
It is. Yeah,
it evokes the broad shape, but it is not the actual.
Yeah, it looks like a spy pistol, which is kind of I think how you think of the Walther P38 is like a World War II spy pistol. And so it kind of has a James Bondy look to it, the gun that Lupin has, but it's not an actual Walther, or it's not even something. It's neither is it an actual Walther or something that is meant to look like a Walther. It's just a different gun, and it is disappointing. Though there is a point where Jigen does have a Tommy gun in that scene where he has a bunch of different guns. I was like, I at least appreciate that they have the World War II era guns. That's another thing I associate with the franchise is everyone has Tommy guns or MP40s for some reason.
Indeed. It's because Monkey Punch grew up in the, in the wake of World War II, and it was all the media he saw, and he put it in there, and then all of the people who wrote part one, or did part one in the anime, like Yasuo Otsuka, were obsessed with the same things, and it's a fun tradition that comes from that, post-World War II moment. Anyway, my favorite joke in the entire movie, though, does come from that orphanage scene with the flashbacks, because there's this amazing image that I had to, stop and screenshot, where you have baby Lupin, age 0, in his cradle, and he's just stolen all of the other bottles, and he's drinking from one of the bottles, and there's this just empty bottles strewn all over his crib, and you have the orphanage guy going bad Lupin, and they have a series of other crimes he's done after that, and they are also funny. But there's something about that image of a baby Lupin in the crib with a bunch of other bottles that is perfect. One of the best Lupin character gags.
Yeah, that sequence is probably the most Monty Python thing in the whole movie, of this sepia tone montage of baby Lupin at different ages doing different things, and all of them end with a voiceover of the priest guy going, Kora Lupin, hey, bad Lupin, stop. And it's it almost sounds like just the same take repeated over and over and over again as you get, I think maybe even more than the baby bottle one is the 3-year-old Lupin who's behind the pulpit and he's smoking a fucking cigar. That one's pretty good. But the best part for me, the payoff of that gag, as you get that, and every time it's Kora Lupin, Kora Lupin, Kora Lupin, and then it fades back into the present day as the guy's reflecting on it. He's like, I can still hear it, my own voice yelling at Lupin, and the fact that the thing you were hearing was that's what he was imagining in his head was him shouting over and over. There's something about that very meta gag that got me.
It's extremely good. No doubt about that. Yeah. I think we've hit all the stuff I found interesting in this movie. One other note I did want to make that is a definite black mark on this movie is it has some pretty homophobic jokes in it here and there. There's one at the beginning that I think, if it didn't have this last bit, is actually kind of funny, where the movie opens with Lupin driving on the highway. He sees Fujiko in a prison van, and he's imagining himself going and making out with her, and so he's doing his kissy face, and then he stops, and the guy in front of him comes out, turns out to be a gay guy, and it's oh, you were, throwing kisses at me. If it stopped there, that would actually be kind of a funny joke. But instead it is Lupin is then disgusted and pretends he's throwing up and all of this. It's very similar to the transphobic jokes in the 90s, stuff like Ace Ventura, where all the men pretend to throw up when they realize they've kissed a trans woman. You get that again where Lupin accidentally kisses a guard later in that scene, and then there's another version of it later in the movie, and it's just this very gross. It's the homophobia where it's the grossest thing a guy can imagine is kissing another guy, and I didn't like it with movies when I was a kid in America, and I don't like it here.
Yeah, and it's the only silver lining there is that it's right at the beginning of the movie, and it doesn't do it throughout the film, because that it gets you off on a real bad foot, because I don't think I started liking the movie until after you get some more of the Zenigata stuff, and after the big scene where he breaks Fujiko out of prison, and then you get the scene where he's interrogated. It wasn't until Lupin started getting interrogated that I'm okay, I'm coming a little bit around on the movie, because that whole opening 10 or 15 minutes or so, I was not a fan of, and particularly because that gets you off on a real bad foot.
Yeah. So something to be aware of if you're going to go watch this movie. What else would you say about Strange Psychokinetic Strategy?
I'm bummed there's no sequel, because I wanted to see how they would do Goemon.
Yes.
It is like I understand why Goemon's not in it, and this movie is doing a lot of shit, so it's like, not surprising. But it would have been great if they had a sequel, so they could have done more, because I would watch another one of these. I had a good time. It's not like the greatest movie in the world, but if you go in with very kind of minimal expectations and just want to watch something you're going to laugh at, like, it's a pretty good time.
Yeah. I think Goemon, honestly, is one of the easier ones to do in live action because he so comes from movies that are not that far removed from this era, and in some cases are ongoing, like Zatoichi stuff.
Yes.
Where you just have, like, the cool, again, Toho had people on the lot who could have done that with their eyes closed. It's
yes, they're doing jokes about, like, a guy with a sword cutting through something that swords can't cut through. That's like, every other week they're doing a gag like that. That's like in every fucking Zatoichi movie, he cuts through something and then everyone's like, huh? And then the hat splits apart. It's
yes.
like those. That's like, if you think that all those jokes come from anime, no, those are all live action jokes from old samurai movies that then anime started doing later. Because that's just a good gag. They realize it's very funny when a guy goes whoosh and spins and waves his sword really fast, and everyone's like, "What did he even do?" And then their clothes fall apart. Like, that's a good joke. And like, Japan has been doing it since like the fucking 60s. If you thought that they came up with that for the fucking Zorro movie with Antonio Banderas, like, no, that's some old samurai movie shit.
Yes, absolutely. Well, do you want to go ahead and move on then with our big season finale episode?
Yes, because I did because you got some stuff. You have some feelings I think you want to express, Jonathan. I'm very curious to hear.
Japanimation Station.
Thanks for listening to Japanimation Station. If you're enjoying the show, please remember to like and subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and tell your friends.
You can also find us over at the Purely Academic Podcast, our potentially educational variety show where we talk video games, movies, TV, and more every month. And you can read my movie reviews and follow everything we release together on the Fade to Lack Substack at www.jonathanlack.com.
And now, back to the show.
All right, so for the next section of today's episode, Sean, I have put together a PowerPoint. I've put together a presentation. We are going to talk about Jonathan's guide to Lupin, the Third music. I have spent a lot of the last couple of months while we have been working on this season listening to all the Lupin music I could get my hands on. I have over 60 Lupin albums in my Apple Music library at the moment. A combination of things I have found in Apple Music, things I have brought in. I have bought several CDs from Japan and imported them because I couldn't find them anywhere and I really wanted them. And I want to give you guys a sense of what's the best Lupin music you can find? Where do you want to go for it? Because there are hundreds of Lupin albums out there just for the Yuji Ohno stuff, let alone other pieces of Lupin music. And I wanted to give you guys a bit of a guide to that. So that is what we are going to be talking about in this section of today's episode.
Yeah, I gotta say, John, so right now I'm doing our, let's call it pre-production on season 4, and I'm doing lots of research for that. And every once in a while I stop and I'm like, am I doing too much? Am I putting too much stuff in here? And then you show up with an entire PowerPoint about the music for Lupin the Third. I'm like, I'm good. It's like I'm still in a reasonable area.
Yeah. You're not going to out-obsessive me. It's okay. This slideshow is 41 slides long.
Jesus.
Let's go through this, Sean. So, first off, little bit of a guide here interpreting this slideshow. There's some symbols you should see here. First off, if you see the little Apple Music symbol with an album that I'm showing, that means that album is on streaming, Apple Music, presumably Spotify. I don't use Spotify, but they're usually on both.
There is a lot of Lupin music on Spotify because I use it. Okay. I assume that they will be on Spotify as well because there's a lot.
Yes. So that would be, you can go find that on streaming. If you see the CD Japan logo, that means it's not on streaming, but you can import the CD, and it's stuff that sometimes I have imported the CD. If you see the pirate ship, the Thousand Sunny from One Piece, that means it's not on streaming, and the CD is out of print, so you're probably going to need to go sail the high seas. And finally, if you see this red ribbon that says Jonathan's Pick, that means it's one of my favorite, most recommended choices.
Good. I'm glad we have a key so that we can interpret this.
All right. So let's start. Let's talk about Part 1 albums. Part 1 is weird because, as we have talked about before, the music for Part 1 by Takeo Yamashita, the original tracks were lost shortly after that show's production. So those original recordings don't really exist anymore. So let me walk you through what you want, though. If you want to kind of cobble together, I think, a good set of music from Part 1, here's what you want. First off, you want the music file EX Lupin the Third 71 ME tracks. That means music and effects tracks. This is an album from 1999. It is actually on streaming, which I think is hilarious. But this is just the raw. They edited the songs together from the existing music and effects tracks. So sometimes you will hear sound effects in there, but they cut it together from different episodes so it was as few interrupting sound effects as possible. It also means it's all in mono, despite this music presumably having been recorded at the time in stereo, and it's a little muffled, but it is the original sound. And there are some that have never been re-recorded. To my knowledge, like the Nice Guy Lupin song, the Lupin, he's a nice man, but he's cool. That one does not never been re-recorded in full, and you can find it here. It's got some like footsteps in it, but it's good to have, and that one is on streaming. There are several versions of the re-recorded Lupin music that you can find. There are a couple of versions of the album, and Yamashita has gone back and re-recorded it a couple times. Some are better than others. The exact album you want is Lupin III, the first series anthology. This is a set from 2003. This combines some of the theme songs from that kind of music and effects track, like the original versions, with the narration, without the narration. It has a special session from 1980 where they did a vinyl release with re-recorded tracks, and that's probably the best set of the newly recorded ones, and then a couple of extra tracks that they made, and so it's kind of a collection of all the best versions from over the years, and that one you can find on CD Japan. You can download it in different places. It's not on streaming, but it is one you want. So if you just want the original Part 1 music, that's the way to go. The album you need from Part 1, though, is one that I did. I originally listened to this on YouTube, and I loved it so much I did import the CD from Japan. It's here on my desk, and that is Guy's Heart, Charlie's Lupin Songs. This is an album from 2002 where Charlie Kosei, the singer from Part 1, came back and this is a full, hour-long album that basically sounds like you are in a jazz and blues club with Charlie Kosei leading a big band as he goes through all of his classic Lupin songs. It has multiple versions of most of the big ones. Like the original theme song has a bossa nova version. It has a ballad version. The ending theme that he does in that has a swing version. It has a ballad version, and it has a solo acoustic version. He has 3 originals on here, one of which is called Hey Mr. Dandy, and is fucking gorgeous. This is one of my absolute favorite Lupin albums. I cannot recommend it highly enough. It is super cool. The performances are killer. It's really well recorded, and there's some really cool versions. Like he does a version of the third Lupin Part 1 opening, the Lupin, 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 and that version is fucking killer. Now maybe my favorite Lupin the Third Part 1 theme, that if they were to put that back in there or something, it is fantastic. Everyone should listen to that one. So,
yes, I will say this. So I did not go so far as to import the CD, but I did listen to most of this album around the time we did Part 1, or a little bit after that. I listened to this on YouTube, and I will vouch for this. This is a Sean pick as well, because this album kicks ass. Charlie Kosei is a boss. Yes, and I do think probably my favorite, I do just adore the acoustic version of the ending theme. The What is up, Sanju Hachi. Every time when we were doing Island of Assassins, the movie that's also called Walther P38, every time I see the title of that movie, when I was doing research and looking at it and stuff, in my head every time it's What is up, Sanju Hachi, and I was upset that they didn't even. This doesn't fit the tone of that movie. They should have put that song in there, at least that clip, because that is the only way in Japanese you should be able to say Walther P. Sanjuhachi.
Abso-fucking-lutely. So that is a Jonathan pick. And one other thing for Part 1 people should just know about is the very recent ONA series, Lupin Zero, did go back. It's a huge... I did not even know this. I recently started watching it. It's only 6 episodes. If we do another season of Lupin stuff, we will obviously review this show. But it goes back to the Takeo Yamashita tracks. A composer named Yoshihide Otomo rearranged them, re-recorded them, has a bunch of that stuff in here. And if you just want to like listen to part one music done really well and faithfully, but with kind of a new energy to it, the Lupin Zero soundtracks are streaming. It's 2 volumes and they're fucking fantastic. So
I have to check that out.
Yeah, and the show is also very good. I've watched a little bit of it, and I love it. All right, that's part 1. Let's talk about part 2 and 3 albums here, Sean. This was like my impetus for putting this together, is there are so many fucking versions of the Yuji Ohno part 2 music. Where do you find those? What are they? What are the best versions? I felt very compelled, like I needed to give a description of these. So let's go ahead and talk about these, Sean, which are the best. Now, the main versions you'll find out there is this set of albums, the original soundtrack from Lupin the Third, volumes 1, 2, 3, with these nicely illustrated covers. These were originally released on vinyl in 1978 and 1979 during the run of the series, and they're good. These versions that are on streaming today have been remastered and have some extra tracks, which is nice. They do sound good. They are missing some tracks. They don't have the vocal themes from basically the second opening ending. And there's a couple other things you will miss versus some other better ones. So if you're willing to go searching for it, my pick for finding the best version of the Part 2 experience would be this box set. It is from 1991. It is 5 discs, and it collects all of the background music, or all of the major background themes from this era of the show. So if I were to show you the 5 albums that it includes, it's 2 CDs that are the TV original theme and background music collections, and that's basically all your good stuff from the TV show, all of the openings and endings, all of your major sort of thematic motifs that you would remember, a lot of big tracks in very good quality. This is, I should say, it's an older CD set from 1991, so you'll notice the volume is lower on this, but the quality is great. You're just going to have to turn it up more than you would modern music, but that's not a problem. And then it does have full soundtrack discs for The Mystery of Mamo, The Castle of Cagliostro, and then The Legend of Gold of Babylon. And for those 2 movie soundtracks, these are absolutely the best versions of those movie soundtracks I've seen in terms of sequencing and completeness. And they've also done a fun thing where music that is primarily associated with the movie but is also in the TV show, they put on the movie disc. So like Toward the Patrol Line is a track that is in the TV show for a long time, but they put it on the Castle Cagliostro disc because it's very famously used in that movie. Tornado, the Jigen theme, I think appeared before Mystery of Mamo, but it's on the Mystery of Mamo soundtrack. So all of that is there. And then Legend of Babylonian Gold, that one is a lot of good Part 3 music, what's in the movie, and then obviously tracks that were in the movie that were used in the show, and it's just a really killer soundtrack. So this 5-disc set, if you can find those tracks, Sean, I could share these with you. This is like the best version of the overall Part 1, Part 2 collection.
Awesome. And you're also have to be reminded that Mystery of Mama's original Japanese title is Lupin versus the Clone, which is a thing I had completely forgotten. And I was looking at that, I was like, what? Lupin versus the Clone? What the fuck was that? Oh, right. Mamo.
Yes. There was a second box in Japan as well, Lupin the Third Box 2. This is also one that is, if you are a real enthusiast, you should find. It's not one of my Jonathan's picks because it's less essential, and it is not arranged as nicely, because this is all like unreleased. It's music that was in the show but was not sort of put into album form. So it is 3 volumes of TV songs and then 2 volumes of stuff from the various movies. And this is like, this is really enthusiast stuff because it's literally all titled like M1, M2, M3. It's like the scoring notes, not arranged into like actual tracks, and it's not quite as like sequenced for sort of nice listening, but it does have a lot of good stuff, and I've listened through a lot of this stuff, and it's extremely good, and it fills in some of the blanks, but this is the other one you want. But the real treat here, Sean, this is one I have to share, is in 2005 and 2007, Yuji Ohno did this really cool fucking project where they had found, I guess TMS and whoever else was involved had found all the original master tapes for the Part 2 music. Not just the tapes, the stems. So all of the different parts of the music. And they did 2 albums where Yuji Ohno went back in and rebuilt the tracks from the ground up to remix the music, but with modern mixing techniques. technology. So this resulted in 2 albums, the 2005 one, which is all of the major theme songs. So the 4 openings, the 4 endings at full length, and then some of the big insert songs, and then some of the stuff from the movies like Fire Treasure and Manhattan Joke, and then a couple of extra tracks with Tommy Snyder, who sang the superhero song on the original show, and he came in and did some extra stuff. And then the 2007 one is a lot of the instrumental tracks. So stuff you would know like Magnum Dance, Tornado, the Zantetsuken theme, Toward the Patrol Line, all of those sorts of stuff. And these 2 together, these are my 2 favorite Lupin albums. These are the 2 that I would take to a desert island with me. The sound quality of these is insane. There are details in this music that you have not heard before. There are themes like the Zantetsuken theme is just completely transformed. And again, they didn't add anything to the music. Yuji Ono didn't record anything new. They're not revisionist. It's just taking the original stems and building them in such a way that you just can hear more of it. And like Zantetsuken is one that there's just whole layers of instrumentation I didn't notice before. But both of these are absolutely killer. I've listened to them several times. I did buy the CDs from Japan because they were really hard to find. Like, I don't think people are very aware of these. They're not streaming. They haven't been integrated into the soundtracks that are on Apple Music and Spotify. But if you can find these actual albums, these masters, this is the best sounding version of the original Yuji Ono material. They are a goldmine.
Awesome. Yeah, I was not even aware that these existed, because I've definitely mostly listened to the stuff from the original thing that you showed with like the very Monkey Punch looking art, but these seem really rad.
Yeah, absolutely rad. For Lupin the Third Part 3, it's a little simpler. There was just one soundtrack released during the life of that show from 1984, the original soundtrack that has been expanded over the years, and then it is on Apple Music, and it is a perfectly good, respectable soundtrack. It's got the opening ending. It's got a lot of the major themes. But if you want to go a little deeper with Part 3, there was a third music box, and this one is enormous. It was 11 discs. This is from 1994. And just to break down what that is doing is the first 6 discs are single disc soundtracks for each of the first 6 TV specials. And then you have a 3-disc soundtrack with basically everything from Part 3. Again, this is all arranged for like enthusiasts. It's M1, M2, it's that kind of stuff, not like actual track names. But they did also put the soundtrack for Strange Psychokinetic Strategy here. And so this is another one that if you are an enthusiast is good to have. But if you just want to listen to the music from Part 3, the one that is just the Part 3 original soundtrack is perfectly respectable, and you could go to that one as well.
Yeah, and of course, you need to listen to Sexy Adventure every once in a while, because that is a hell of a song.
All right. Let's get to where I got obsessive.
Yeah, I gotta say, Jonathan, I'm terrified and excited by the fact that we're on slide 18 of 41, and you just finished going through the music of Lupin the Third Part 3. So what is on the rest of all these slides?
So, I don't talk about my music tastes all that much on these podcasts, but I am definitely a fan, growing, trying to learn more about jazz. I like listening to jazz. And that is one of the reasons I love Lupin III, because it's real-ass awesome jazz. And since 1999, Yuji Ono and a variety of Ono-associated groups have been doing a series of Lupin III jazz albums. And I have listened to every single one of them in full. And I am going to walk you through all of the Lupin III jazz albums, because it's kind of hard to find them all in the right order, contextualize what they are. I realize a lot of people will not want to listen to every one of these back to front the way I did. So I want to tell you guys which ones are the best, some tracks from these you should go track down. I kept notes on all of these as I went through them. So are you ready to walk through the Lupin III jazz experience with me, Sean?
Let's talk about some jazz.
All right. The first Lupin III jazz album from 1999 is an interesting one. It's almost all classic Lupin tracks circa Part 2, although it does have Manhattan Joke from Part 3. Some of the later Lupin jazz albums become increasingly tenuous in their relation to Lupin, but this is all actual Lupin music. Most of it's slower and laid back on this one, especially the main theme. I think there's better and more creative jazz renditions of a lot of these songs on future albums, but this one is a solid listen. There's a version of Fire Treasure, the Castle Cagliostro theme, that has a really great saxophone part. This is a good album, not one of the standouts to my mind. Lupin III Jazz the Second is a
great name for this album.
Yes. It's an interesting album. This one is mainly comprised of English lyric covers of the Lupin songs. And these are solid, and they're like new lyrics written to kind of fit the original tracks, sometimes not very closely related to the Japanese lyrics, but you have Love Squall, the Lupin theme, Fire Treasure, the Love theme. The whole thing is pretty low-key and slow. There's not a lot of variation, and so it's not the best, like, sit down and listen album. Ohno's piano work throughout this one is very good. The instrumental tracks I enjoy better than the vocal ones. There's two called Bourbon Street Lullaby and Catwalk that are other jazz songs that are probably the standouts on here. But if you want to hear some like jazz club English covers of Lupin, this is the one you want to go to. The first standout in this series to me, though, is Lupin the Third, Jazz the Third, Funky and Pop, which is from 2001. This is one of the best. Despite the title, only a few of the tracks are really funky and pop styled, but they are all good. You have funky versions of the Lupin the Third theme. You have a Zenigata march that is called Zenigata Rock, which they would do in the future a few times as well. And then Fire Treasure also has a funky version that is absolutely killer. One of the best versions of that track. You also get a rendition of Ohno's solo track Mayflower from the album Space Kid, and that is one of the best tracks on any of these jazz albums. A lot of other standouts. This is a album with the Yuji Ohno trio. Most of these jazz ones are the Yuji Ohno trio. That is him on piano, plus someone on stand-up bass and on drums. But this is one of the best top to bottom. Everybody should listen to this one all the way through. It is fantastic. The fourth one, they stopped numbering these Lupin the Third, Jazz the Fourth, or something like that. This one is called...
I mean, once you're above the third, you can't do it.
Yes.
It's just like you know, there's a giant canyon, and then eventually you get to like the 13th or whatever the fuck Zenigata is, and then that's when you can start doing it again.
Yes. This fourth one is called Lupin the Third Jazz, Bossa, and Fusion. And this one has several vocal tracks with Sonia Rosa. We've talked about her before. She's a Brazilian bossa nova singer who moved to Japan in the late 60s and lived and worked there the rest of her life. She was mostly retired past the 1980s, except for doing work with Yuji Ohno on Lupin, starting on part 3. And this is a very good album. I like those tracks a lot. They're very interesting. But I will say the standout here is there's a solo piano version of Fire Treasure that is just ridiculously gorgeous and is the main reason to seek this album out. Then we get to one of the weirder albums, Lupin the Third Jazz, Another Jazz from 2002. It's another jazz with jazz in quotation marks, so I'm not sure why they're being ironic about the term jazz, but that is what this one is. This is one of the absolute best listens in the entire series. It is absolutely a Jonathan's pick. It is also an odd duck, because while the songs here kick ass, this is technically a compilation album collected from a couple of different places, mainly from these two albums from 1999, called Isn't It Lupin Tick? Like, isn't it fantastic, but isn't it Lupin Tick? And Isn't It More Lupin Tick, which are two You and Explosion Band albums. That's the band that Yuji Ohno put together that did the original Part 2 music. And these are two CDs that some of the tracks were used in various TV specials, but they're these sort of big band, really energetic tracks. And tracks from these two were taken out and put on the Another Jazz album. There's also some shared... some of these tracks were also on Jazz Album 1, because this all kind of came out around the same time. In any case, I would just go listen to the two Lupin Tick soundtracks, because you get sort of all of that. The Another Jazz album does have uniquely the 2002 version of the Lupin the Third theme, a full version of the shorter cut that is used in the Episode 0 special, but I think this is the only place the full-length version was issued, and it might be my favorite, like, straight-up normal version of the Lupin the Third theme, so I would recommend it for that. In any case, wherever you find these tracks, there's a lot of really, really good stuff here. It's like kind of bigger sort of like rock jazz kind of. There's a lot more guitar. It's a lot more high energy, but it is fantastic, all of the tracks across all three of these albums. So I did want to unspin that for you, and I realize I'm being needlessly nerdy about all of this.
I do have to say, Jonathan, at this point, I've hit the, like, you know, when you read a word so many times, the word turns into mush. You kind of, it doesn't make sense to you anymore. Like, looking at, like, Lupin the Third Jazz, Another Jazz, and looking at the word on that box are, with them both being all in caps, like, the word has broken down to me. Like,
I'm sorry.
What is the word jazz? No, this isn't you. This is the album. There's something they're doing there with the fonts and the spelling. It's like, does jazz always, that word always look like that? It's crazy.
Well, here is one that is absolutely a standout, and I think will teach you the true meaning of jazz by teaching you the true meaning of Christmas, because the next album is Lupin III Jazz Christmas.
If there's anything that goes, it's three things. It's jazz, it's Christmas, and it's Lupin III.
Indeed. This sounds like it should be a silly theme on the surface, but it is deeply fantastic. Even the most familiar songs it has Jingle Bells, it has Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. They go off.
I was thinking it didn't occur to me that this was like literally this is Christmas music.
Yes.
I thought it was like Lupin music, but they put some sleigh bells in it. I thought was what this was going to be.
I think the only Lupin song on this one is Love Squall, and it is a gorgeous saxophone-driven rendition of Love Squall. Absolutely one of the best ever recordings of that track. Otherwise, it is traditional Christmas songs, and they all go off in fun, unexpected directions. There's a lot of just good, like, freewheeling jazz improv where it generally starts with a pretty recognizable version of whatever the theme is and then goes off in other directions. The guitar really shines on Winter Wonderland. The saxophone is a song stealer on several tracks. The variety is really great. And then you've got this very strong foundation from the main Yuji Ohno trio. This is a delight. I will be putting this on at Christmas every year from now on. It is an absolute classic.
I love that this, like, by all rights, this album should be called Yuji Ohno's Jazz Christmas, but for marketing reasons, they had to put Lupin III on there because, like, the idea that, like, we have one Lupin III song on here and everything else are Christmas jazz versions of Christmas standards, therefore we will call this Lupin III Jazz Christmas is blowing my fucking mind.
Well, and I should say, this marks the point. Past this point, most of these albums are mostly non-Lupin music, and it is really just an excuse for Yuji Ohno to record a new jazz album every year, but they are still fantastic if you like jazz and if you like Yuji Ohno's style. The next one is called Lupin III Jazz Plays the Standards, but standards is in quotation marks again, so I don't know why they're being weird and cagey about the word standards, but it is what you would expect. But it is absolutely a banger, one of the standouts of the entire series. This is a pure trio album, just the three instrument. The selection of standards is first rate. It's stuff like Sea Jam Blues, Autumn Leaves, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, Swonderful. It's wonderful. It's written weirdly.
Right.
They're all really lovely and playful. There are some other really cool choices, like they do the Disney song When You Wish Upon a Star. A lot of those early Disney tracks were jazz standards in like the mid 20th century,
right.
And this is one of them, and they do a really good job with it. There are two Lupin tracks. You get the main theme and you get Fire Treasure. Neither are like revelatory versions, but they're good performances nevertheless. The main theme has a really good build to it with the three solos coming sort of into the ensemble with this like heavy energy, and Fire Treasure is one that is done with like the bass taking the melody, and it's pretty cool. There's a sequel to this album, because the next one is Lupin III Jazz Plays the Standards, in quotes, and others. So it is basically just on par with its predecessor. It could probably be like outtakes from those sessions, but it's a really cool selection of tracks. They have Fly Me to the Moon to kick this one off. The song, I don't think that's actually a Frank Sinatra song, but it's like popularized by Frank Sinatra. They do the Beatles song And I Love Her, which is a super cool choice and includes some amazing piano improvisations by Ohno. We get another version of Zenigata Rock. This is a very bass-heavy version that is super cool. And then there is the jazz standard Misty that is an incredible piano showcase. So these two, both standards albums, are absolute Jonathan's picks for me. Then you have Lupin III Jazz Cool for Joy. This is a pretty great one, too. This is Yuji Ohno Trio and Friends, which means you have some extra variety on track. It's a cool mix of songs, only one Lupin song this time. It's the main theme. Pretty much all of these have some new jazz version of the main theme, which is always fun. But otherwise, this one is, its theme is basically songs from around the world. You have a Latin track, The Gift, the Riccardo Bossa Nova. You have some notable tracks like My Funny Valentine. The title track, Cool for Joy, is a Yuji Ohno original, and it's outstanding. But the highlight is probably a rendition of the Burt Bacharach classic The Look of Love, which absolutely sounds like it would be on par for like the soundtrack of a Pink Panther movie. It would slide right in there. It's absolutely killer. And then the version of the Lupin theme we get is a waltz, and it's a pretty unique take with xylophone on it. Not used to hearing xylophone on that theme.
You know, I am a big fan of xylophone. I love it when people can work xylophone into their instrumentation. So, that always gets a thumbs up from me.
Then you've got Lupin the Third Jazz, the 10th.
Yes.
We're at the 10th. Yeah.
I could remember I called it. It's like there's a gap. Like you can't do fourth, like you can't do that. You gotta wait until you get to the higher numbers.
Yes.
Fucking look, I 100% fucking called it.
You did, and this is a great one. This one is Yuji Ohno and his new band at the time, the Lupintic Five. So it's a bigger ensemble, and this is great. It's a very different than the others so far because it's a full 5-person ensemble throughout. So there's more horn, there's guitar. It's a different energy. Most of these are longer 6-minute tracks with a lot of space for improv and passing the melodies around. So it is a real blast. And this one also, to celebrate, we're all the way back at the 10th, goes back to mostly Lupin tracks after a run of albums that were lighter on the Lupin themes. You have a standout version of Tornado, the Jigen theme, amazing horn and drum work. I also love the Zenigata March here as well, although my favorite is still probably the original Zenigata Rock from the third album. There was a direct follow-up to this one, again with the Lupintic Five, that is Lupin the Third Jazz, What's Going On? Absolute Jonathan's pick. This is stylistically a sequel to the last album, but this time no Lupin tracks save the main theme at the end. In place of that, you get, as the title would imply, a full jazz version of the Marvin Gaye song, What's Going On? And Oh my God, it slaps. Phenomenal translation of a classic with some of Ohno's best piano playing doing the vocal line. He really makes it sing. Later in the song, you get in the Marvin Gaye version, you have What's Going On passed between him and the choir. Mm-hmm. And here they do a call and response tossed between piano and horns. Later on, there's a call and response between the different horns on the track. It is one of the best tracks in the entire Lupin Jazz series, and is one of the reasons I had to do this fucking presentation. It is so cool.
I'm happy. It clearly has absolutely nothing to do with Lupin, but that's a fucking great song, and I'd like to hear a good jazz version of it. So,
you've also got the song "Cute," great drum part and drum solo. "Where Is the Love," which is a Donna Hathaway song, beautiful smooth jazz version, very horn highlight, and a great slower version of the Lupin theme with a particularly good sax part of the main melody and other interpretations. It is awesome. Then we get Lupin the Third Jazz, For Lovers Only. This one starts and ends a little slowly. It's closer to easy listening than these albums are at their best, but when it gets cooking around the middle, it's great and in line with some of the earlier Does the Classics trio albums, because the middle run of songs here are ones jazz fans will recognize. Sunny, Corcovado, Hushabye, You Don't Know What Love Is, and Smile, and those are all absolute standouts. This one actually, despite being called Lupin the Third Jazz, has no Lupin songs on it whatsoever. It does have a major Ohno original with the song Love Ballad, which is the theme from the TV show The film The Inugami Family, which is a Kon Ichikawa film that Ohno did just before he joined Lupin in 1976. And one other note, this is technically the end of the Lupin the Third Jazz series. They stopped giving them these names, but the series very clearly continues. So I've picked out the ones that fulfill the continuing mission of the Lupin Jazz series to fill you in on where this series goes.
I would say, I do think, just looking at the box art, I think it's interesting, or box art, album art, that this is the one where they do also transition to Yuji Ohno Trio is gigantic. It's 1/3 of the album art, and then it says For Lovers Only, and then you just get a little tiny Lupin the Third quote-unquote jazz, and that's just sort of there snuck in. So it does feel like they realized we really can't justify calling these Lupin the Third albums at this point. It's probably been 5 years since they should have been doing that. And so they're like, we should just call this Yuji Ohno Trio For Lovers Only, which is a totally fine, you could just call an album that. It's totally fine.
Yes. Then we get, here's another Jonathan's pick, the 2009 album Feelin' Good. It is not called Lupin the Third Jazz, Feelin' Good, but it is absolutely one of those. It's only one Lupin track again, which is Jazz Squall, which is a introduction of Love Squall in jazz form, but it's not dissimilar to the others. This one has the vocalist Miki Imai on several tracks, including Moon River, Your Smile, and that beautiful version of Love Squall. And it's just all around one of the best. You've got big performances from the Lupintic Five in jazz band arrangements of classics. There's a lot of sort of Latin and American South flavor, some songs called Del Sasser and Summer Samba, and then you've got Moon River and the Tennessee Waltz. So sort of an around the world album again. Very cool. You've got an album called Let's Dance. I would love someday to find out how many albums have been called Let's Dance, because it's a lot. I think of the David Bowie album, but there's a lot of them. Anyway, this is a Lupintic 5 album. It kicks ass, big jazz rock album. It includes an original called ATM with vocals by Toshiaki Doi, who is an announcer for TBS radio in Japan, doing this big spiel over the music like it's one of his radio broadcasts. It's fun. And this one excited me because finally, this is the 14th jazz album, and we finally get a jazz version of Sexy Adventure, the opening to Lupin, the third part 3.
I gotta check that out.
Yeah, it's a big band incarnation. It's really cool. A lot of horns. You've got a big shredding electric guitar in the middle. I would love to hear like an actual Yuji Ohno trio version that's like more small scale. But this absolutely, if you wanted big jazz sexy adventure, it is on here for you. And a couple of other Lupin classics, like a fantastic version of Love in Sao Paulo, which is one you don't hear on a lot of these albums because you have to have horns for that one. And they have horns because this is a Lupintic 5 album. So there you go.
I do like how it's not called like Lupin Jazz, but they do have Fujiko on the album art.
Oh yeah,
which is confusing. But you know, they can do what they want.
Yep. This next one is all Lupin music pretty much, but it does not have Lupin on the cover. Instead, this is the album Yeah Yeah by Yuji Ohno and the Lupintic 6. There's 6 of them this time, and it is these little like caricature drawings of the musicians, including a very grumpy Yuji Ohno at the front. It's a very funny cover. And this one's pretty straightforward. It is big band album of Lupin songs, absolutely killer standout versions of the Zenigata March and Tornado. This is one worth checking out, but pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I'm glad that they're getting some new people in there. We've got a 6th Lupintic member, or a 7th, depending if you want to count Yuji or not. It seems like sad that he doesn't get to be apparently a Lupintic because he's not counted as one of the 6.
Then Yuji Ohno went back to basics for the 2017 album Let's Fall in Jazz from 2017.
That is a great fucking name for a jazz album, I just want to say.
It sounds like, if you've seen Parks and Recreation, you have the Ron Swanson character has his jazz musician persona. That's absolutely like one of his fake jazz songs. It's hilarious. But no, Let's Fall in Jazz. This is such a good album. This is back to basics with just the Yuji Ohno trio. You do also have Lynn, the singer who did all the Persona 5 music. Mm-hmm. She sings on the title track. It is a track called Let's Fall in Jazz that is based around the melody of Let's Fall in Love. But then it is just the main trio on everything. And it's a mix of jazz standards, couple of Lupin tracks. All of it's fantastic. I think the drums might be the song stealer on both this album and the next one. The trio is in really amazing form. It's got a cool structure to it. There's an interlude in the middle redoing Let's Fall in Jazz. And then the final run of tracks starts with this solo piano version of the Love theme, building into a absolute rip-roaring 6-minute rendition of the Lupin theme, which is probably my favorite jazz version of it. And then a final outro with Lynn coming back again. And if you liked this album, there's more of it, because there was a sequel called Let's Fall in Jazz Again. And Let's Fall in Jazz Again is just as good. It's mostly similar stuff, except that the opening track is a new redone version of Let's Fall in Jazz, but with more instruments, and instead of Lynn, a digital robot voice singing the main lyric. And I don't mean a Vocaloid, I mean like Mac 1984 Hello doing Let's Fall in Jazz. Let's Fall in Jazz. Is it like
the the GPU song from the Pac-In game from PS5, the Astros?
Yes.
Boy,
I'm your GPU. Yeah, absolutely. It's just like that. Lynn is on this album. She comes back in for 2 big jazz songs, All the Things You Are, and then an original hybrid song called Jazz Squall, which is great. And then you've got all the instrumentals. They rock. The drumming on both these albums is particularly great. There's a back-to-back tracks early on called Cute and Tio Pepe that really showcase this sort of dynamic, syncopated drumming. For now, this is the last Lupin Jazz album. There hasn't been anything new. And I know Yuji Ohno has been in kind of ill health recently. He was in the hospital over the last month, I think, as we're recording this. Apparently he's okay. He tweeted the other day, I think, or someone did on his behalf. So I hope we get more at some point. But if this is the end, it's a great little 2-part finale here because these last 2 albums are fantastic.
I do love that you described this as a Lupin Jazz album. I mean, I know that Lupin and Jigen and Goemon are on the cover, but it feels like it's been like 15 years since they made an actual Lupin Jazz album at this point.
It's what it is. They just stopped calling them that. But yeah, it's the same.
Well,
if you listen to these, you would understand.
They stopped calling them that, and they stopped putting in a majority of Lupin music on the albums and mostly did other songs.
Yeah, has mostly Lupin songs.
Okay.
Yeah, and these last two have a couple. But yeah. Okay, we're almost done, Sean. A few others. I put this in big text because I didn't know what else to put here. These are 3 other Yuji Ohno albums everyone should listen to. First off is Space Kid from 1978.
I will say this so far, this is the best box or album cover art we have seen so far. It is just for people who are only listening, it's just Yuji Ohno on like one of those rings at like a playground. He's just hanging out. This is 1978, so he's like a young Japanese man just swinging, having a good time.
So this is a real classic album from Yuji Ohno, done during the Part 2 run. It sounds like it could be an alternative Lupin soundtrack. It includes one of his best ever compositions, which is called Mayflower, but the whole thing is incredible. Really amazing vibes. I'm not sure who the musicians were on this, and I'd probably have to go get a CD from Japan to get liner notes, but the performance and mixing sounds a lot like the Part 2 music from the exact same year this came out, so I assume it's the same sort of group of studio musicians, but this is a real classic recording, and it does, as you say, Sean, have an incredible cover. Then this does not apply for the Lupin the Third Jazz series because it has no Lupin music on it, but it's essentially Lupin the Third Jazz album, and that is Y.O. Connection, as in Yuji Ohno Connection. This is a great set of tracks, but the main reason I'm mentioning it is that it opens with a jazz version of the theme from MASH, Suicide is Painless.
Okay.
It's very good. And then finally, he did an album called Boss Piano, which is just a great name for an album. It's tremendous. It's, again, basically one of the jazz albums just without Lupin music. Lots of them. It's mainly American classics, and the start and end tracks, which are You Are My Sunshine and Georgia on My Mind, are sublime. Just pure standouts. Piano is the key instrument throughout, and it's some of Ohno's best playing in his life, but all the performances and arrangements are incredible. You got some big horn parts in the middle. Very, very good album. And with that, I say, Owari.
Very good. So I've got a couple of questions. So on Boss Piano,
Yes.
why is Boss Piano not get to be counted as one of the Lupin jazz albums?
I think, so of all the Lupin jazz albums we talked about, I think only For Lovers Only doesn't actually have Lupin music on them. The rest of them have at least one or two, if not sometimes more. I think the main thing with Boss Piano, though, is that I don't think it has any Yuji Ohno compositions, and it's a different style. Like I said, it's a lot of American standards. And so I think that's kind of the feeling, although some of these other ones go around the world as well. But I think that was the idea with Boss Piano. I don't know why. I thought about just kind of throwing it in the series, but the other ones also sometimes have Lupin characters on them, usually. This one is just Yuji Ohno on the cover. So there you go.
Yeah. Also, I wanted to scroll up to, there was one of the ones that had Lupin and Yuji Ohno on the cover at the same time, and it was like the same
plays the
shot.
Standards.
Okay, no, okay, because I was yes, okay, that's another box art I'd like, and I was like, is that the same thing for shot from Boss Piano? No, they are different.
They are different. Yeah. So I hope this gives people a sense of where they should go in the world of Yuji Ohno music and Lupin music. I cannot state how much I adore the music for Lupin III and all of Yuji Ohno's work. He has become one of my favorite musicians in my entire life. I love this music so deeply. It's become basically the way I listen to all of this is it's often what I'm listening to when I'm walking my dog. This is how I make it through as much of this as I have made it through. But I really do treasure a lot of this music. I think Lupin the Third Part 2 is, with a bullet, the best soundtrack ever written for TV. Just the fucking amount of stuff that was done for that show, and that it is still paying dividends to this day, is incredible. We could do a whole season just on Lupin music. It's incredible.
Yes, well, you said that you can't express how much you love the music, but you did make a 41 slide long PowerPoint slide presentation, so I think that we have not yet done that. This is a new feature on the podcast. I think that speaks volumes.
Japanimation Station.
All right, so Sean, we're at the end of this season 3 of Japanimation Station. How have you enjoyed it?
It's been a good fucking time. I did not have any first-hand experience with any of this stuff coming into this season. And it was very gratifying. You know, I'm glad that purchase I made of the Lupin the Third Part 1 Blu-ray, which had nothing to, you didn't even know that I had that. I had it, and I just had been sitting on it for a little bit, waiting for a good time to watch it, and then you're like, let's do a Lupin the Third thing. I'm like, I've already spent money on a Lupin the Third thing, so it's like that purchase, I feel very fulfilled for the money I paid for that Blu-ray, and then the money I paid for the, like, 8 other Blu-rays I bought for this season.
Yes, I have a pretty big Lupin home media collection at this point. No, for me, I mean, I'd seen more Lupin stuff than you, and I think I had always suspected that if I did a deep dive, I would get obsessed, and I have become obsessed. This is like, I would now put Lupin up there with Dragon Ball and Gundam for me as like the anime franchises I am most in love with. It's the kind of franchise where even the stuff that isn't as good, I tend to enjoy just out of interest in the series and the characters. And boy, so much of what we watched this season, Sean, was incredible. I think the biggest surprise for me, because I guess outside of some of the Miyazaki stuff, I didn't know this, is what a crazy standard for animation Lupin has had over the years. I think all of the TV shows we watched are among the best animated TV shows I've seen. You know, even in something like Part 2, which is more variable because they did it weekly for 3 years, when it is cooking, nothing else looks like that. Yeah. Going on into the specials and into the films, like TMS has just maintained a level of quality with this series on that aesthetic level that is really remarkable.
Yeah, and you know, like I think that this is more your thing than is my thing. Like, you know, like I really love Lupin, and I'm extremely excited to like continue to watch more Lupin stuff. But this is like, I think this is probably clear across this podcast that this is a Jonathan franchise first and foremost. But it is, yeah, like it is an absolutely remarkable series, and yeah, I think one of the things that I was surprised by also was just how high the bar was set by so much Lupin stuff. Like some of those episodes in Part 1, like, I mean, just what is like episode 4, the one where Lupin is in jail for an entire year. Like, what an incredible piece of TV animation in terms of like particularly direction and editing that is, and just like conceptual storytelling. And then some of the high marks set by Part 2 with like the Miyazaki episodes or Scattered Magnum and that kind of stuff, which are easily like either the best or certainly like amongst the best in like the top 10 best animated episodes of TV anime I've seen, especially if you're looking specifically at cell animation, because I think it's hard to compare that with like some of the UFO table stuff we watched because it's so stylistically different, and you know, you don't have the digital like CG stuff, and so like their styles are so different. It's hard to compare which is technically better animated amongst those. But you're looking at classic TV animation, I mean, it doesn't get any better than Scattered Magnum. I mean, that car chase at the beginning of that episode is all-time great. Like, it's as good as the car chases we watched in the Lupin movies, which are like some of the best animated car chases in animated film. So that really surprised me. And I think the other thing that I didn't conceptualize going into this season that ended up being one of my favorite parts of it is just getting to see how the style evolved along with the period that it was set in. Going from the early 70s that had that like 70s style, but it was 71, so it's close enough to the 60s that you get a little bit of that 60s flavor in there, to the full 70s stuff of Part 2 and Mamo, to like just one of the most 80s ass anime you could possibly watch in Lupin the Third Part 3. And then through like them just struggling through the 90s period, trying to find what is Lupin in the 90s. And then we just peek up a little bit into that sort of like awkward phase as it's trying to transition into digital animation. Then obviously, you know, there's a whole other half of that story that we haven't touched yet of 21st century Lupin and where it goes, where obviously, you know, you've teased with like the woman called Fujiko Mine, and I know what that show looks like, where this series goes from there. But that was the thing that, in terms of recording the podcast and watching these shows, I loved so much, was just getting to see the history of anime alongside this franchise that runs more or less the whole gamut of the fucking thing.
Yeah, that for me was a real pleasure. Obviously, I did a lot of research over the last 8 episodes to bring in a lot of the history, but I found it just incredibly fascinating and gratifying to learn that history, to see that history play out through our eyes, because we did kind of a swath of almost all like 20th century anime. If you think of like anime as a thing begins in the 60s basically, and the pilot film is 69, Lupin is pretty close to like the birth of anime as a medium in terms of our modern understanding of it. And it's not far removed. A lot of the people who did it were there on Astro Boy. They were there on the Toei movies, you know, and it is cool to see how that extends through the decades with this franchise. And that Lupin can be so many things, and all of them, most of them, can be so, you know, ridiculously fun. Do you have a favorite thing we watched this year?
Probably. I mean, I think my favorite thing still is Mystery of Mamo. I think that's my top. Like I do in my heart of hearts, it is part one in Mystery of Mamo is, you know, and some of that might be like, that's the first thing we watched. I think it also like is just a little bit more to my sensibilities. But that movie is fucking incredible. And it is weird. And it like makes sense to me that that is not the really famous one. And the really famous one is Castle of Cagliostro. But like, if you ask me to sit down and rewatch one Lupin thing right now, it would absolutely be Mystery of Mamo, because that movie is one I think I'm going to keep on coming back to over the years, because it both hits all the things I really enjoy about this franchise, the kind of anarchic sense of humor, the very sort of like, you know, silly violence, and kind of like the sexual stuff that I just, you know, find amusing. It's got all the stuff I like about all the different characters, but it also has a really thoughtful and interesting story to tell about Lupin and who he is as a character, and it's got a lot to say and explore that I think is going to make that movie very rewarding to rewatch in the years to come.
I agree with all that. I think Mystery of Mamo and Castle of Cagliostro, they're hard for me to like parse apart. I've seen Castle of Cagliostro much earlier in my life as well, and I had seen Mamo before this season, but I haven't, you know, seen it as many times. I think they are both phenomenal movies. I do think Mystery of Mamo is the purest, best, most uncompromised expression of Lupin as a character in animation. I do think that is Mystery of Mamo. Now, do I think that's a better or worse movie than Cagliostro? I don't know, and I don't really care. They're doing two different things. Like, Cagliostro is a different flavor of Lupin, but I also think it's a valid and interesting one, and I think it's one of the greatest animated movies ever made. I also think Mystery of Mamo is one of the greatest animated movies ever made. So I think sometimes those movies are kind of put into some kind of competition, and I understand in so much as they are very different, but for me it's more like, I think it's cool that they both exist, and I think I would point to them as just doing, like, expressing different things. I do think if I wanted to show someone, like, what is the heart of Lupin the Third, so much as we can find one, I do think Mystery of Mamo is the best expression of that. You know, in terms of the TV series, it's tough because we saw all of part one and only part of part 2 and 3. I think part 2 has this incredible, like, level of, you know, experimentation and fun and these huge, you know, quality spikes in terms of the animation. And I think it having that firm 5-person cast, generally using them well, you know, it is one of the most reliable anime out there. Part of me does still think part 1 is my favorite of the TV shows, though, because it is just, in part because we saw the whole thing, but also, like, the journey of part 1, seeing it evolve all the ways it does, all of the incredible people who stepped through the gates of that first anime, how many great episodes it has in those 23, and how even the down episodes are pretty fucking interesting. Yeah. What a fascinating use of music it has, how dynamic the animation and direction is. I do think Lupin the Third Part 1, like, you know, maybe one day when I have seen all 155 episodes of Part 2, it would be a different kind of conversation, and then you're talking about a 23-episode show versus a 155-episode show, and it's a difficult conversation. But boy, at this moment in time, I would sit down and just watch a whole disc of Part 1 episodes right fucking now. It's so good.
Yeah, and I definitely think for me, in terms of like specific episodes, it is episode 4 from part 1 and its Scattered Magnum are the two I would like hold up as like, look at these the fucking things. Like, look how good this is. Just on the terms of animation, particularly for Scattered Magnum, I mean, it's just crazy. But also like storytelling, editing, and also like kind of two different sensibilities. There's something about just like, there's something gnarly about episode 4 of Lupin the Third Part 1 and the core story it tells about Lupin going so far for such a small, petty reason. But it like explores something really interesting about the psyche of these two characters. And then just in terms of a piece of like action, and kind of an action story. Scattered Magnum is just fucking all-time great, amazing shit.
Yeah.
But then also you have, on the other end of things, you've got Jesus vampire stuff, and you've got a talking dolphin, and, you know, you can't forget the silly sides of Lupin the Third as well. And while they're not, like, I think as good, you know, it's like as the like very seriously well done stuff, but that is a part of the franchise I also love. I also want to be able to laugh at Lupin being, as far as we're concerned, canonically married to a dolphin for the entire like second half of that franchise.
Yeah, and in terms of episodes of TV, I absolutely agree with the two you mentioned. A couple other standouts I just want to add to that. Episode 9 of Part 1, which is the Poon episode.
Yes.
All-time great piece of TV direction. 14, which is the one on the cruise ship with the diamonds and Lupin, Fujiko, Zenigata's sort of dance together, I think is the best, like, Miyazaki-era one of Part 1. From Part 2, I want to add the Yoshiyuki Tomino episode. In Jigen, I saw the Gentleness of Man's Soul, the one in Russia. That one is... Or no, is that Face of Goodbye? No, Face of Goodbye at the National Border is the art collector one later on.
Yeah, you were right. It's I saw the Gentleness of the Man's Soul, which is
but that's the best of all the great Jigen episodes, yes. And then Albatross Wings of Death, the first of the two Miyazaki episodes from Part 2, is also like every bit the equal of Scattered Magnum in terms of how does this exist on TV, you know? And then for Part 3, there's a lot of good ones, but episode 13, the Seijun Suzuki episode, every bit the equal of those other ones. And one of the most like fascinating avant-garde experiments in commercial animation that I think has ever been mounted.
Yes, no, absolutely. Seijun Suzuki's episode is amazing. And then there's like, while I don't think that's the only one for me in Part 3 that's at that level, you do have like the Death Garv episode that is really good in Part 3. You've got the one with the girl who has like the angel or the devil paintings that turn into angel paintings. That's a really good episode as well. So Part 3 has some great stuff. And then, of course, if listing all like my favorite things in terms of the TV specials, my favorite is Bye Bye Lady Liberty. I think Bye Bye Lady Liberty is just fucking great. I mean, you can count on Osamu Dezaki to give you an absolute fucking banger. And when your story is like a 90-minute thing or whatever, and 30 minutes in, you've already stolen the Statue of Liberty and hid it in the fucking Grand Canyon, you're cooking with some fucking gas, my brother.
I 100% second that. I would add Tokyo Crisis as my other favorite of the specials and kind of that era. But again, even some of the ones that are messy or like Dead or Alive, super worth it because it's fascinating. You know, it's an incredible show, and we saw so much good stuff. I'm excited to one day do another Lupin season and see all of the rest of the stuff because this is a special franchise, and the amount of like truly capital G great stuff we watched this season was an absolute treat.
Yeah. So I'm very excited. I'm sure we will come back. We'll revisit Lupin. I mean, I've been watching more Lupin the Third Part 3 stuff here and there because I have that Blu-ray. So I've been going back and watching some of that, and that's very good. I want to go back and watch some more Part 2. But then I do want to... I got to know what happens. You know, what happens to these characters? I mean, obviously, that's not the kind of show it is. It's not like, where does Lupin go from here? But in terms of, I want to obviously watch The Woman Called Fujiko Mine. I really want to watch some of the new stuff. Like, I was so curious that I went and I looked at, I just like went on High Dive because I have a subscription to that right now to watch some other stuff. And I was clicking through the most recent one that has Akio Otsuka as Jigen, just because I wanted to like listen to some of that cast and just get a preview. And it was like, that shit looks really fucking good. Like, that looks like a really good show. Just like clicking through a random episode to just hear some stuff. So this is definitely the thing we're going to come back to in the future.
I have not heard Akio Otsuka as Jigen yet. I have not gone and seeked that out, but one day I will get there. Yeah. Anyway, Lupin is something special. I love it. I have one thing to confess. This is funny. I just the other day finished up with the first chapter of my dissertation, which is the chapter that there were several reasons why we did this season now. One of the reasons was I was writing about the woman called Fujiko Mine in this chapter of my dissertation and wanted some extra Lupin background material. I cut that section. Now, I cut it as a full standalone section. There wound up still being, I counted last night, it's 5.5 pages of material on Fujiko Mine, and then some stuff that came out of our podcast conversations, I reoriented it around that. So it still wound up, but it was a much smaller part of my dissertation overall than I thought it would be. So there you go. It made me, I just realized what I wanted to write about that show was really its own standalone thing and just wasn't quite fitting into the overall arc. So it's still in there, but I did find it very funny. I'm like, oh, Sean's going to laugh his ass off when I tell him that.
But it's funny. I mean, but again, I mean, I had already, you're the one who came up with the idea. Like, this was something I had thought about as well. Like, I think I had not conceptualized how we would actually do it. And I'm very glad that you did all the the work to figure that out. Because that's another thing about this season I'd love to talk about this time. But I had Lupin the Third Part 1 on Blu-ray already, and it was a thing I wanted to do. And I think in the back of my head, one of the reasons why I hadn't gotten around to actually watching it was because we'd started Japanimation Station. And I was like, I don't know how, but we probably will hit this at some point. And so whether or not you use it in your dissertation, this is the thing that I wanted to do. But saying that did also remind me of another thing I do really love about this season for our show. This is less about Lupin and more about Japanimation Station, but it has been really fun getting to try something so different. Not just different than what we've done on Japanimation Station, but different than something we've done on any of our podcast topics, whether it's Weekly Suit Gundam or Weekly Stuff. We've never really hit something that is this episodic like this, other than when we've done things like Doctor Who, but we covered that in real time. So like we just did an episode on each episode of the show as it aired. Whereas for this, I think you kind of have cracked open a thing that we could use. And there's already a couple of other, we're drowning in topic ideas. So we don't need more topic ideas. I've had like 4 or 5 other topic ideas that I've started putting like brief outlines just to see if they would work. And there's like a couple of things that I didn't quite envision how we could do it before, that doing this and thinking, oh, like for the show like this, we could just, we don't have to do every episode of part 2. We can do some. And that's fine. And that we can get really like rewarding conversations out of that. And it doesn't feel like, obviously we could do a different podcast that's like just Lupin the Third Part 2 podcast, but it's also okay to do we're doing a sampling of this enough to be able to talk about it and get into it, but not so much that it becomes what the whole show needs to be about. And so that has been something very fun. And I also have to give you props, Jonathan, for all the research you have done, because you have like really upped the game on the podcast for that. I think that is partially also motivated by this is a topic that demands a much bigger level of research, but it has also made me go fucking insane because it has lit a fire under me for the next season we're doing. And I've been doing a way more work for that than I ever done researching, but not in a way that I feel like I have to, but in a way that you kind of show me, oh, there's like a deeper way that you can push some of this stuff that I think is going to continue through for this podcast in the future, because I think you have upped the standard for us.
Well, thank you. And I just did it because it's fun. I mean, this is also what
yes.
I do as a scholar. What I do as a scholar is I talk about Lupin all day. No, but it was fun. And I have to admit, this season is one of my favorite things we've ever recorded for the podcast in any form. I just had so much fun with it. And I agree with you that I do think it opened up some avenues for future stuff that our upcoming season where we review every episode of Doraemon from the last 50 years. No, just kidding. But if we wanted to do a sampling of Doraemon, I think we've somehow broken through the completionist barrier and realized, because that's the other thing, the people who made part 2 didn't expect everyone to see every episode of part 2. Yeah. That's not how TV used to work. It's okay, you can jump around. It was made for that. I think it has also been liberating to see a swath of history in a shorter span of time is very cool. So I've enjoyed the hell out of this season, and I thank you for going through the Zenigata adventures with a little Lupin on the side with me.
Yes, that was my favorite part of this also, is that you shared your notes with me whenever we did the podcast episodes, which was helpful. But then it also meant I just got to see into the brain of Jonathan Lack in a way I don't think I've ever had full access to before, and the sheer quantity of notes about Zenigata stuff compared to everybody else, I just found so fucking funny, because it got more dramatic the longer we got on, as your love for Zenigata, which was there at the beginning, but it deepened and richened and matured over the course of us doing the podcast, to the point where it's man, Zenigata was barely even in this, but he sure did take notes on every single scene that Zenigata popped up on. And that happened a couple times. Man, It's like, I wish I loved anything as much as Jonathan, you love Zenigata and Lupin the Third. It's a beautiful thing.
It is funny. I took most of my notes while watching this season on my iPhone. I'm trying to come up with a better way to do that because I don't always like having my laptop out because I think it's distracting and big. Typing on my phone can be nice. Sometimes I like writing by hand, but I can't get everything down. I don't know. I'll find something, but the phone is working okay. But it has meant that my autocorrect has learned the names of all of the Lupin cast, such that the other day I was trying to type a word. I don't remember what the word was. It was a normal English word with the letter G, and it kept coming out as Goemon. And it was very funny. It just kept autocorrecting to capitalized Goemon. And it was funny. But anyway... Yeah, so Sean, do you want to finish up this here season by celebrating the world of Lupin with a little game I put together?
Yes, Jonathan, you love your little games, and I love to play along with them. So yeah, let's have some fun.
Japanimation Station.
All right, Sean, for our next segment here in the grand finale of Season 3 of Japanimation Station, we're going to do a little game with some of our favorite Lupin the Third characters. So, Sean, in our Google Drive, there's a document that says Secret Surprise Segment Document, No Sean's Allowed. I'm removing the part that says No Sean's Allowed. You are now allowed to access this document.
Okay, let me refresh the page so that I can see the title change. Okay, I've seen the title change. I can now get into the No Sean's Allowed document.
Okay, Sean is now allowed. We are going to do a Lupin family draft. All right. So here's the draft game. So we are recording this Memorial Day weekend. We're recording this on May 28th. At the moment that we are recording this, Sean, you guys are hearing this in August, but we are in May, and we are a couple days away from the United States defaulting on the debt limit. And seemingly nothing. The Republicans want to blow up the whole world. So. Yeah. I'm just going to speculate here, Sean, and I'm going to say that what happened is that we had to mint the coin. People have probably heard about this, the idea of the Treasury minting $1 trillion coin and then hiding it somewhere so there's no inflation, but using the $1 trillion coin to pay off all of our debts. I'm going to assume that happened because I think that sounds like a really fun episode of Lupin the Third. So this is the game. Lupin and company are on a quest to steal the legendary coin that was minted and then locked away in the vaults of the U.S. government to prevent rampant inflation. And you and I are going to be drafting teams out of Lupin characters to see who has drafted the best crew to steal the United States' $1 trillion coin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
If you want to suggest a different thing to steal, that's fine.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay.
Let's do this. I'll win.
Let's do this. All right. So, the $1 trillion coin has been minted. We're going to draft teams. There's 2 of us, so this is a very simple draft. But we have the main Lupin gang. Obviously, we're going to be pulling from them. So the main 5, Lupin, Jigen, Fujiko, Goemon, Zenigata. But then we need some more to fill out the draft. So I have come up with a list of guest stars. Let's go through these really quick, Sean, to see if there's any we feel that we need to take off the table if we want to whittle this down at all. But here, or if there's any you want to add. Here are the guest stars I've added that we could draft onto our teams. All right?
Okay.
So I have the 2 Mamos, Kyosuke Mamo, the time traveler, and Mamo. My thought was maybe they're both too powerful, but if we have both and we could each draft one, maybe they cancel each other out. I don't know. Do you think it's fair to have Kyosuke Mamo, the time traveler?
Sure. Yes.
Let's do it.
Let's
Okay.
have both Mamos.
Both Mamos. I have Alice from the Cinderella Stamp episode, the little girl who Lupin hung out with. She seemed to have a real flair for robbery. She did get Jigen and Lupin to go, stick up an Old West store. I think she might have some insight here.
She's pretty formidable. Yeah, I thought we can keep her around.
Then I have a giant set of assassins. I don't know if we want to whittle this down. I tried to pick the best ones, but it turns out, Sean, there have been a lot of one-off assassins in the Lupin-verse. I have Poon, the assassin from Part 1 who was in love with Fujiko. I have Beauty, the assassin with the .44 caliber Colt Python. I have Keith Hayden, the assassin from Voyage to Danger or Orders to Assassinate Lupin. I have Death Gurv, the assassin from Part 3. I have George Cougar, a.k.a. Lefty Joe, the sharpshooter from the Star of Alaska 2-parter in Part 3. Do we want to get rid of any of them, or do we just leave the giant list of assassins untouched?
I mean, for me, the only ones that really stand out that I would... if it was me, I would only choose 2 of these. I would take either Poon or the Death Garv. The other ones are still good, but those are the 2 that to me are the most memorable. So I don't know if you want to keep the others or if you just want to narrow it down a bit more.
We have to do these in sets of two. I'm gonna get rid of Keith Hayden, and I think George Cougar. He's a good sharpshooter, but Daisuke Jigen exists. I want to keep Beauty because I think it's funny, the guy with the giant python.
Yes, he's also good. Yes, I think Death Guard kind of like overshadows him a little bit.
Yes,
just purely on character design merits, but Beauty is still good.
Yeah. All right. I have Camilla, Sister of Jesus, also a vampire. She is in our draft.
My only question is, because obviously I want her in here, but she is also dead at the end of that. She just gets struck by lightning and set on fire. Well, that's true.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Yes, that's true. Because the assassins are all dead. That's fair enough. Okay.
Letitia the Dolphin. I think that's going to be a fight to see who gets Letitia the Dolphin first, because she has some skills. You can do just a whole underwater unit led by Letitia the Dolphin. This is a set of multiple characters, but I think they have to go together. Zenigata's Angels from the third movie, Caramel, Chinjiao, Zaxkia, Saranda, and Lasagna from the ICPO Most Beautiful Cop pageant or whatever it was.
Yes. Yeah. The super cop babes or whatever.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, I have Michael, the kid from Bye Bye Lady Liberty. He actually was pretty clutch. He did a lot of good work with computers, so I think you want Michael. And I have Maria, the precognitive reporter from Tokyo Crisis, the special. I think she would be a good fit on the team as well.
Yes, though the one I came up with, I can't remember what his name was, but the magician guy from part 1.
Oh, Pycall? You want Pycall on here?
Yes, Pycall. Pycall should absolutely be on here. Pycall the magician.
Right.
He's
Sounds
great.
Good. Anyone else? We have to have an even number, so I'm gonna just make sure. I'm gonna see how many we have here by numbering these. We need one more. I could put one of the assassins back. We could try to think of somebody else.
Trying to think of like a character from one of the movies. Like we could have like Oleander from Dead or Alive, because we did that. That was our most recent episode.
I just don't know if she has enough special skills.
Yeah.
It needs to be someone with a very compelling set of skills from everything we've watched. Like, I don't know if Castle Cagliostro necessarily has anyone that we would bring in. We already have Mamo from Mystery of Mamo.
Who's the alien from The Legend of the Tower of Gold of Babylon, or where the fuck that
Oh, yes. Okay. The Legend of the Gold of Babylon. Let's see. What was her name? She's the one, it's Rosetta, and we find out that she is that alien goddess. Yeah, let's go Rosetta, the alien goddess.
All right. She seems pretty good.
All right. So this will be a 9-round draft where we will go back and forth. Do you want to do a normal draft? Do you want to do a snake draft? What do you feel is most fair?
I don't, this is your game. You can come up with the rules.
Because there's only 2 of us and it's even, I think we will do this normal draft style. I don't think we need to do a snake draft. All right, Sean, I have Google here with the flip a coin function to see who will take the first pick in our draft. Do you want to go ahead and call heads or tails?
Heads.
It's flipping. It's heads. You get to go first in the draft. So, Sean, you get the first pick. Who do you pick in the draft for your team to steal the $1 trillion coin?
I'm going to go with the MVP, the most important. This isn't even a funny choice. This is just like straight up who you want on your draft. I'm getting Mine Fujiko, and I've already won. She always wins. She's going to get away. She's going to, whatever plan you come up with, it's fucking over. Fujiko's the MVP of Lupin. I win.
All right. Well, and here's the thing. We will have a poll up somewhere on YouTube, Twitter, etc. when this episode is out, and you guys can go vote and tell us who won the draft. I think that will be important to have. So, yes, you have picked Mine Fujiko, which means I get the next pick, and I am going with Ishikawa Goemon. Goemon can cut through shit. I think that is, he is the guy who comes in at the end of every fucking heist. I think it is a tried and true method that you get a couple of people to dig a hole under wherever you are going. You get Goemon in under the hole. He cuts the bottom out, and you steal the thing. I am taking Goemon because I want the ability to do that.
Goemon's pretty clutch. I'm going to go next with, if I've got Mine Fujiko, I'm going to then go for her subordinate, the ace reporter Maria, who also has magic precognitive powers, so she can see the future to help with my heist. So I'm going with her.
All right. I am then picking Letitia the Dolphin because I don't know exactly how much water will be around where we are, but if there's anything that requires anything underwater, I think this is a strong advantage that we would have, because Letitia, like, uncovered an entire conspiracy in her episode before then getting a shotgun wedding to Lupin III, so I think Letitia needs to be here, and she can probably call other dolphins in as well. I think you get more than one dolphin with Letitia.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the only problem with picking Fujiko is that you can't pick Letitia because there's no synergy there. They just end up fighting each other. So that's it was what I struggled with in picking Fujiko. It's like I can't do her and Letitia, or Letitia would have been my number 2 pick. All right. So next up, I'll go with let's go with Kyosuke Mamo, the time traveling of the Mamos. I got to get a dude on the team who Fujiko can seduce, and who better than the guy who also can travel through fucking time.
I think that's pretty good logic, and since you picked Kyosuke Mamo, I'm just going to grab the other Mamo right now, so I don't lose a Mamo, because the other Mamo is nothing to, sneeze at. He had an entire fucking crazy worldwide network where he ruled the Earth for thousands of years or something. He's got powers.
Yeah, Mamo's pretty good. Kyosuke Mamo is also pretty good. And yeah, you can't have one team have both the Mamos, or it would be too much. So the next up, let's see, I need someone for, we're talking about the years 2033, right? This isn't a present day heist. This is a future heist. And if this is a future heist, need someone also who can deal with the tech here. So I've got Michael. If my mouse could actually click the thing properly. There we go. So I've got Michael from Lady Liberty. I'm recruiting him. He's my kid in the chair. He can hack this shit, get into the Pentagon or wherever the fuck we're going. So that's my next choice.
That's pretty good. I think that is correct. God, there's a lot I want to choose here, but I'm just going with Jigen Daisuke right now because I fear he's going to get picked soon. There are a lot of good guns on this list that you could get, but Jigen Daisuke is the greatest sharpshooter in the world. He's beat all of them. I think, who knows if we're going to have to shoot our way out, but if any shooting is required, I want Jigen on my side while I can grab him.
Yeah, well, if you're going to go, I wasn't going to grab this one because I felt like if I've got Mine Fujiko, it's like, I can't do this. But if you're going to get Jigen, well, then I need my counter for Jigen. The only counter for Jigen is the man himself, Lupin Sensei.
See, I did not want Lupin on my team, though. I was hoping you would pick him because that would make my team complete. I would definitely lose if I had Lupin because he would just betray us for Fujiko and I would fail. So I think it is better for me that I'm surprised you did it because I think
there's only one person that Jigen has never beat in a gunfight, and that's fucking Lupin III. They fought each other to a standstill, but, these never won.
I'm taking Camilla, Sister of Jesus, the vampire, because I don't know if I have a justification for that. She can turn people into vampires, is our understanding from that episode, and she has lived thousands of years. She is the sister of Jesus Christ. I mean, there's a lot going on here. I could possibly start a whole fucking religion, but mostly I just think it's funny to say I have Camilla, Sister of Jesus, parentheses, also a vampire, on my team.
Yeah, well, if you're going to go with Camilla, Sister of Jesus, well, then I need a counter for that, and the counter of his course is Rosetta, the alien goddess, a ruler of the Gold Tower of Babylon, who came to this planet many, many centuries ago on Halley's Comet, who has powers seemingly like unfathomable, is able to, with her like flying saucer and all that shit, lift a giant tower of gold out from underneath New York City. So that's what I'm going with.
That's pretty impressive. Boy, there's still a lot of good choices here. I think I'm gonna take Zenigata's Angels. They showed a lot of initiative in their movie. They got some shit done. They stole tanks. They were doing lots of stuff. I think they're a little unwieldy and hard to control, but I think hopefully we can all work together and send them in the right direction. Plus, Goemon is already on my team, and he and Shinjao, they work well together.
That's pretty good. Man, I'm very tempted to go a certain direction, but I just would feel too bad. I just couldn't have him on my team. So I'm gonna leave him there for you. I'm gonna go with Alice. She's got spunk. She's got initiative. We need a youthful energy. I think maybe there could be a fun, like, romance, maybe potential romance between her and Michael as the two kids on the team. Or I think Michael would have a crush on Alice. So that's where I'm going.
Well, because you're threatening on taking my beautiful boy, I'm going to take him. I'm going to take Inspector Zenigata. I don't know if that's actually like a plus with Zenigata's Angels because they didn't like him. But Zenigata, he is not the most capable cop in the world, but he is more capable than you might think by his silly exterior. He has gotten shit done before. The only problem is he's not a fan of illegality, so this might be a problem because he might not want to commit the crime, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I was struggling with, like, should I take Zenigata and have him be on the same team as Lupin? Because you have that sometimes. You have that's a fun episode when you have Lupin and Zenigata, and they have to achieve an objective together. But also it's but it's not the classic. The classic has to be that Lupin and Zenigata are opposite sides, so.
And, it might be a benefit for me because now Zenigata will be extra motivated to stop steal the coin and get it to safety before Lupin can steal it. So maybe now I have extra motivation on my team, and Zenigata will take a leadership role.
Yes. Well, now I have to go next. The man I added to the list, he's coming onto my side, is Pykel, the magician himself, the man with impenetrable skin who can seemingly float and fire at people. He's got some hardcore chemistry know-how that could come in to play here that could really help us out. And he's cool.
That is very cool. I am picking Death Garv, the assassin from Part 3. He's a very good assassin. He also has a small amount of precognition because of the bullet lodged in his optical nerve that allows him to see around things a little bit extra. So that could come in handy because you have a little bit of precognition with Maria. So maybe this will help. And, yeah.
Losing Death Garv is brutal. I was going to go with him next. I'm
sorry.
I'm sorry, Death Garv. Well, if I can't get Death Garv, I got to get the next best thing, which is Poon. my two Part 1 assassins here, Pykel and Poon, together. I'm a big Part 1 stan, so I got to go with my Part 1 boys.
Yeah, okay, that leaves me with Beauty, the assassin with the 44 caliber Colt Python. I think Beauty is actually probably overrated as a pick generally. It's just that he has a big gun. You can't overcome a big gun, even though Jigen is scared of it. But he's on my side, so I'm good.
Yeah, does he get to have some magical dum-dum rounds that can, explode boulders, too?
Of course he can, yeah, absolutely. It was in his episode, yeah. All right, well, there we go. We each... Are you happy with your team, Sean?
Oh, I'm fucking thrilled with my team. I got this on lock, dude. My team fucking rules.
So definitely let us know in the comments. Hopefully we have a poll out there I think YouTube has a poll function. I will try to put that up, and maybe we'll also have that on Twitter or somewhere else. We're recording this months ahead of time. There's absolutely no guarantee Twitter will still exist when this episode comes out. I am more sure about the $1 trillion coin thing happening than I am about Twitter still existing. But there will be a poll somewhere. Sean, remind us who is on your team.
All right, my team starting at the bottom is Poon, the assassin. And then I've got, coming up with the rear is Pykel, the magician, who I'm going to use his chemistry know-how and his seemingly magical abilities to help me out. Then I've got Alice from the Cinderella Stamp episode. She's, I think, just a cunning strategist who can synergize well with the rest of my team, adds a strong chaotic element in there. Number 6 is Rosetta, the alien goddess. She's my ace in the hole, where if there's anything unpredictable, well, she's like... Hey, if you got a fucking brick wall, well, then you got to bring a stick of dynamite. She's my stick of dynamite. She can solve probably any problem with her magical alien technology. Number 5 is Lupin the Third. He's Lupin. What else is there to say about it? He's done this kind of shit before. He's got a lot of experience in the game. And I think he can bring that to this team and really help bring things together. Number 4 is Michael, the hacker kid from Lady Liberty. He's my man in the chair. He can hack things up. He's also buddies with Lupin, and I think he'll synergize well with the other child. I've got Alice. Number 3 is Kyosuke Mamo, the time traveler. So if somehow Jonathan's team wins, they can't, because they'll just travel back in time and do it again, like Doctor Strange in fucking Avengers, where it's like, hey, there's the one scenario where we win. Well, Kyosuke Mamo does that. So I probably won on that one. Number 2 is Maria, the precognitive reporter from Tokyo Crisis. She's very cute, so I wanted her on my team. But she's got magic powers and can see the future. So we can both anticipate what Jonathan's team would do and be able to counteract that. She just adds a lot of pep and spunk and some youthful vibes to the team as well. That's very good. And then leading the pack is the woman herself, the unbeatable, the indomitable Mine Fujiko. She can seduce like 5 or 6 members on Jonathan's team to get them to be on my team ultimately, really. I would love to see the sort of like juggling act she has to take in seducing like 10 different men in this scenario between the 2 teams at the same time, but she could absolutely fucking pull it off. And at the end of all of this, basically everyone's going to be out of shit and like, you know, going to be like on the side with nothing, and Mine Fujiko will be off. She will have taken the $1 trillion coin for herself and go off, and she's not even going to use it. She's not going to spend it on anything. She just wants to have it, and she deserves it because she's a queen.
All right. Formidable team. Absolutely no doubt about that. But I think I've got a good group too. Starting off with Beauty. He's an assassin with a giant Colt Python. He can blow shit up. Formidable, not the leader of the pack, but I do think a good one to have. Alongside my number 8, Death Garv, an assassin who can see into the future. He's not going to lose any gunfights with anyone you've got, at least. Poon ain't shit on Death Garv. Number 7, I've got Inspector Zenigata, who I think will be extremely motivated. Lupin III is on your team. He's going to want to catch Lupin. He's going to want to outfox Lupin, and nothing is going to get in his way. He will also have access to Zenigata's angels, Carmel, Qinzhao, Zangskia, Saranda, and Lasagna from the ICPO's beauty pageant. And you know those ladies. They are crazy. They're going to bring the tanks. They are my chaos agents, I think we could say. I have a literal vampire on my team and also the sister of Jesus Christ, Camilla. And, you know, if you are going to be seducing my people, well, then she is going to be seducing your people and turning them into vampires. And also children in Christ. Number 4 is Jigen Daisuke, world's greatest sharpshooter. You remember that episode where he did the sniping thing from 55 meters away on top of a crane? Yeah, he's going to be doing that kind of shit.
And he shot the same part on the window like 100 times to slowly whittle it away.
Yes.
Yeah, no, Jigen's pretty fucking good.
Yeah, I'm glad to have Jigen. I have Mamo, not time-traveling Mamo, but Mamo who has lived through the eternity of time, seemingly, and is just a tricky little guy who has done some crazy shit. I also apparently get access to, like, Napoleon and Hitler with Mamo, given what is on his island. And, you know, one of those I probably don't want to use, but one of them is a great military mind who ruled the seas. So maybe we go with Napoleon. Speaking of the seas, Letitia the Dolphin, I think this is where I have some real clutch because Letitia hates Fujiko Mine, and she is competitive with Fujiko Mine, and I think Letitia is going to want to get this shit done, and anything dealing with the waterway, maybe, depending on where this $1 trillion coin is hid, we could even have Letitia and her dolphin friends dig us a tunnel under the sea so that my number 1 pick, Ishikawa Goemon, can come in and cut a hole in the bottom of the bank vault and get that $1 trillion coin out of there, and that is why I've got Goemon on the team, because you get Zantetsuken, and that shit's unbeatable.
Yeah, I think that top half of your team is pretty strong. I think Letitia is the one. Letitia and Carmela are the two I'm eyeing, being like, man, that's pretty. You know, like Mine Fujiko can't just have sex with them and then just like ruin everything for your team. So that's you know a little bit harder to deal with. So those are, I think, the two I'm eyeing as real competition here.
Sean, I love this show so goddamn much. That we have spent a season watching Lupin III, and now we are getting to talk about the sister of Jesus, and a magical dolphin, and a time traveler, and an alien goddess, and a little girl who is obsessed with a Cinderella stamp, and a magician. This Lupin III is the best.
Yes, and of course, Death Garv and Poon, 2 of the great assassins of all time. And Beauty's there, he's fine. But Death Garv and Poon, those are some real ones.
Oh, I love it. So let us know who won the draft. Who is going to steal the $1 trillion coin?
And why is it going to be me?
All right, Sean. Well, that was fun. And that brings season 3 of Japanimation Station to a close.
And what a season it was, Jonathan.
What a season it was. But we will be back. We'll be back in a couple of months. We're looking at, right now, things could change. I'm thinking end of October, but you will get an update soon on the exact date. For season 4, we've been renewed. Sean, what is season 4?
Well, season 4, we've already talked about it before because we announced it, but it is, of course, we've been just working real hard. You know, it's
Yes.
like this Lupin was a lot of stuff, so we need a little bit of a vacation. So we're taking a Kyoto vacation. Japanimation Station, we're checking out Kyoto Animation, one of the great studios in all of anime. And I have been hard at work on pre-production on the season, and there's a lot of good stuff coming down the pipe. But just as a general preview of where we're going to be going, so you have a sense, because kind of like with Lupin, we can't cover every single episode of Lupin. We're not going to cover every single show that KyoAni has made, because that is its own. That's not its own podcast season. That's its own podcast series. So we're doing a sampling, though this will be the biggest season of the show so far. A general overview of what we're looking at. We'll be starting with the KyoAni adaptations of key visual novels. That's visual novels developed by the game company Key. Air, Kanon, Clannad, and the second season of Clannad called Clannad After Story. Then we'll be taking a look into the wonderful and zany world of Suzumiya Haruhi, with the melancholy of Suzumiya Haruhi, both of its seasons, and the movie Disappearance of Suzumiya Haruhi. And I haven't actually told you this, Jonathan, but I am making an executive decision, and we're also going to watch Lucky Star as a part of that, because my research has made me realize we cannot cut Lucky Star. So we're doing Lucky Star as well. And then in part 3 of that of the KyoAni season, we'll be taking a look at the delightful world of K-On! And all the girls of the Hokagu Tea Time Club. So we're watching K-On! Season 1, Season 2, and the K-On! Movie. And then we are taking a look at Nichijou and Hyoka. Nichijou, also known as My Ordinary Life, what I have been on record as my favorite comedy anime ever. I'm very excited to get to that, because I've been very antsy to watch this season of Japanimation Station, and YouTube is already giving me lots of recommendations for Nichijou clips, because I've been looking at those, because I have a hunger for them. And then we're getting back to director Yamada Naoko's work with A Silent Voice, or Koi no Katachi, and then also her work on Sound Euphonium seasons 1 and 2, the movie, kind of spin-off movie, Liz and the Blue Bird, and then the big Sound Euphonium movie from 2019 called Our Promise, A Brand New Day. And then we'll be wrapping up our KyoAni season with a very delightful series, and one that I'm extremely excited to finally be able to cover, which is Violet Evergarden. So we'll be doing Violet Evergarden and the 2 movies, movie 1, Eternity, and the Auto Memory Doll, and then the second movie simply titled Violet Evergarden, the movie.
Which I just got in on 4K Blu-ray, because I've been building myself a little KyoAni collection. I'm happy to see that Lucky Star has a cheap re-release of the Blu-ray, so I can get that and add that to the pile of anime we're going to watch. But Sean, I haven't seen any of these, so I'm very excited for this.
Yes, I've seen most of this. There are a couple of these, and actually we're starting with Aaron Kanon, neither of which I have seen before. And I've never seen Sound Euphonium, which I'm extremely excited. It's like one of those that I've been meaning to watch forever, and they just kept on putting out more of it, and so I kept on waiting, and then now it's finally a podcast thing, so now I don't have to stress about it. But yes, I am so excited. I have a copious amount of notes that I have done that goes... The history of Kyoto animation, I will say, stretches back way further than you would think. Way further than you would think, considering that the first thing that we're covering is from fucking 2005. And some of the stuff, the first note I have is about stuff that happened in 1956. So it's a big fucking history, my brother. So there's a lot going on here. I'm super excited to finally get into it, because I have gone down a crazy rabbit hole, and we haven't even watched one episode of Air yet. So you got some really good stuff coming down the pipe in the future here on Japanimation Station.